In the gaslit drawing rooms of Victorian England, behind curtains of silk and walls of silence, the most powerful empire on earth kept its darkest secrets. Publicly, it preached restraint, propriety, moral rectitude. Privately, it devoured its own. And no one exposed that hypocrisy. No one dragged it screaming into the light, quite like two women who dared to live entirely on their own terms. One had nothing, the other had everything. And between them, they brought the British monarchy to its knees. Lillie Langtry arrived in London like a match struck in a dark room. No title, no fortune, no connections worth a damn. Just a face that stopped traffic and a mind that Oscar Wilde called the finest he had ever known. Within a single season, she had conquered society, captivated the Prince of Wales, and ignited a scandal that would burn for decades. She invented the red carpet before Hollywood existed. She pioneered celebrity endorsements before the word celebrity had meaning. She built a fortune, a theater, an empire, all from the wreckage of a world that tried to own her. And she carried a secret, a daughter born in shadow that would haunt her to the grave. Daisy Warwick was her mirror and her opposite, an heiress at 3, hand-selected by Queen Victoria herself for a royal match. Given every gilded advantage the empire could bestow, and she set fire to all of it. She replaced Lily in the prince's bed, and then, when the affair ended, she did what no woman in England had ever dared. She threatened to publish the king's love letters, holding the crown itself to ransom. 4 children by 3 different men, all beneath one husband's roof. A fortune spent on socialism and suffrage. A life that careened from ballrooms to barricades, from diamonds to debt, from royal mistress to labor candidate. They were separated by birth, by temperament, by fate, but they were bound by the same insatiable man, Edward, Prince of Wales, future King of England, and by the same magnificent refusal to play by anyone's rules but their own. This is not a tale of quiet scandal whispered behind gloved hands over afternoon tea. This is the story of 2 women who seized the 20th century by the throat before it had even begun, who wielded desire as a weapon, fame as a fortress, and secrets as currency, who rose higher than any woman of their age was permitted to rise, and paid prices that would echo through generations. This is the full, uncensored story of the most scandalous women in Britain. If you like stories like this, stories that go beyond the 15-minute summaries and get to the real stories behind the headlines and the scandals, then you have come to the right place. Here at Mythic Women, we have over 100 biographies on amazing women throughout history, some broken, some unbreakable, and all of them unforgettable. And we would love to have you join us in this project of helping women's voices be heard. Now let's get into this week's story. Part 1. The legendary rise and fall of Lillie Langtry. Born Emily Charlotte Le Breton on October 13, 1853, in the ivy-clad Old Rectory of St. Saviour, Jersey, she entered a world of quiet privilege. Her father, the Very Reverend William Corbett Le Breton, was the island's formidable dean, a man she would later describe as widely adored for his geniality and charm of disposition. Her mother, Amelie Davis Martin, was a delicate beauty, poetic, musical, and possessed of a quiet, wistful air. The Le Bretons cut a striking figure. The dean, towering over 6 feet, had eyes as sharp and blue as the sea, a mane of prematurely white hair, and the bearing of a soldier rather than a clergyman. By contrast, Mrs. Le Breton was a wisp of a woman, fragile yet luminous. Charles Kingsley, who had known her as a girl in Chelsea, called her the most bewitchingly beautiful creature he had ever seen. Together, they had 7 children, 6 sons, and at the heart of them all, Lily, the lone daughter in a household of men. Their home, wrapped in climbing roses and sweet-scented jasmine, stood as a sanctuary of Victorian domesticity. But beneath its fragrant facade, scandal brewed. Like many a vicarage of the age, the deanery harbored its own sins. In her carefully worded memoirs, Lily painted her father as a man of warmth and charm, but years later, she would be more candid. He couldn't be trusted with any woman anywhere, she wrote. Dean Le Breton was, in the euphemistic phrasing of the time, a ladies' man. His indiscretions ranged from whispered liaisons to outright scandal. One tale tells of the dean emerging from church with a beauty on each arm, only to be set upon by their enraged husbands. A man well practiced in evasion, he simply melted into the crowd, leaving the gentlemen to thrash at one another, their walking sticks raised like sabers. But not all his escapades were the stuff of light-hearted gossip. Jersey teemed with darker rumors, of housemaids and flower sellers too afraid to refuse the advances of the muscular man of God. Some claimed his distinctive features appeared again and again among the island's children. Even the local postman, years later, bore an uncanny resemblance to the long-dead Dean. His wife, embodying the silent endurance expected of Victorian women, took to her bed, plagued by mysterious ailments. She outlived her husband by decades, speaking of him only in hushed, reverent tones. "My dear husband, the Dean," she would murmur, as though invoking a saint. For Lillie, the revelation of her father's indiscretions did not come as idle gossip, but as a wound. At 16, she had fallen hopelessly in love with a local boy, handsome, slightly younger, and by society's measure, beneath her. When her father commanded her to end the romance, she refused. Only then did he reveal the truth. The boy was his son. The words struck like a blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, the walls pressing inward. She had adored her father, worshipped him to the extent of a fixation. Now, in one brutal instant, the foundation of her childhood crumbled. She lost not only her first love, but the illusion of her father's virtue. Yet even before this reckoning, Lillie had never fit the mold of a Victorian miss. Raised among 6 brothers, she was neither sheltered nor subdued. "I must steady my nerves, control my tears, and look at things from a boy's point of view," she would later say. As she grew, Lillie became an incorrigible tomboy, a spirit of wild freedom amidst the pastoral beauty of Jersey. She could climb trees with the agility of a squirrel, vault fences with the grace of a wild colt, and match the boys in their enthusiasm for mischief. The tree-shaded churchyard of St. Saviour's became their kingdom, a place where innocence and rebellion blurred. In the dead of night, Lillie and her youngest brother would sneak out of bed, hearts pounding with the thrill of forbidden adventure. Draped in sheets and mounted on stilts, they haunted the graveyard like mischievous spirits, unsettling any late-night passers-by. Their ghostly antics continued until a stern letter appeared in the local Jersey paper, warning that the restless spirits would be met with a blast of buckshot. Their thirst for mischief was insatiable. Door knockers, those proud sentinels of the parish's stately homes, fell prey to their marauding hands. Braving snarling dogs and the wrath of enraged householders, they claimed their trophies with a daring that both delighted and exasperated their neighbors. Yet of her 6 brothers, only 2, William and Clement, would survive. The others were tragically claimed by accident or disease. The weight of memory rested on her shoulders. The laughter that once echoed through their home, now replaced by a silence as vast and profound as the sea that surrounded their island. But beneath her wild streak lay a contemplative side, one that found solace in the quiet company of books. Her father, for all his failings, was a man of progressive ideals. He believed women should be as well educated as men. Under his guidance, she studied Shakespeare, Latin, history, and mathematics. Her mother, the gentle duchess of their home, nurtured in her a love of poetry and nature. Together, they found joy in the wildflowers that carpeted the island, the birdsong that filled the air, and the ever-changing sea that cradled their world. At 14, she received her first marriage proposal. Lord Suffield, a distinguished visitor to Jersey, once told her, "Do you know, Miss Le Breton, that you are very, very beautiful? You ought to have a season in London." But when she did, it was a disaster. At 16, Lillie and her mother arrived in London, hopeful and eager. The world they entered was one of polished manners, measured words, and practiced charm, an art she had never been taught. At a grand ball hosted by Lord and Lady Suffield, she stepped into a glittering world of silks, diamonds, and whispered conversations. From the first moment, she felt utterly out of place. But humiliation was never enough to crush Lillie Langtry. Back in Jersey, she set about transforming herself. She read voraciously, absorbed poetry, and studied the art of conversation. Between the ages of 16 and 20, she reflected, I learned the magic of words, the beauty and excitement of poetic imagery. I learned there was something in life other than horses, the sea, and the long Jersey tides. Beneath her lyrical reflections lay a pragmatic yearning for London, for society, for escape. "I was possessed by a conviction that my destiny lay in London," she would later write, her words tinged with the quiet urgency of a caged bird. And in a world where a woman's fate so often hinged upon matrimony, Lillie understood that marriage was the vessel that might carry her to the broader stage she craved. But suitors of consequence were scarce in the damp, provincial air of the Channel Islands. Lillie was 20 before she encountered a man who seemed to offer even the faintest promise of more. Edward Langtry was not, by any measure, the gleaming knight of a schoolgirl's imaginings. A widower at 26, he cut an unremarkable figure. Plump, phlegmatic, his expression perpetually resigned beneath a drooping mustache. His passions began and ended with sailing and fishing. His lineage, though respectable, bore no trace of nobility. His father and grandfather were Belfast ship owners, men of trade rather than title. Yet in Edward, Lillie saw possibility. He had attended Oxford, or so he claimed, and dabbled in law. He owned a house in England. Most enticingly, he appeared wealthy. His yacht, the Red Gauntlet, anchored off St. Helier, glittered like a promise. One day there came into the harbor a most beautiful yacht, Lillie later recalled with a wry smile. I met the owner and fell in love with the yacht. To become the mistress of the yacht, I married the owner with the reluctant blessing of her parents, who both believed, perhaps rightly, that she could have done better. Lillie married Edward Langtry on March 9, 1874, in St. Saviour's Church, her father presiding over the ceremony. Instead of glittering ballrooms and soirees, Lillie found herself adrift, sometimes quite literally, on Edward's yachts or marooned at Cliff Lodge, their home overlooking Southampton Water. He was poorer than she had imagined, duller than she had feared, and to her dismay, not as easily managed as she had assumed. While she struggled to navigate the unfamiliar rhythms of household management, Edward frittered away his days in idle chatter with his yachting companions. We had so little to say that breakfast became a solitary ritual. 2 trays, 2 rooms, 2 strangers. It was hardly unusual. Victorian wives were not expected to find pleasure in the marriage bed, nor were their husbands expected to provide it. Brides were often led to the altar in a state of near total ignorance, their mother's only instruction being not to deny their husbands their rights. Lillie's disappointment was not unique, but for a woman of her vibrancy, it was a quiet devastation. Yet the deeper wound was not found in the hushed silences of their marriage, but in the cold reality of social exclusion. Despite her new name, the Red Gauntlet, and Cliff Lodge, she remained a provincial outsider. She had escaped Jersey, but London's gilded doors remained firmly shut. In late 1875, illness struck. Lillie fell dangerously ill with typhoid fever, a sickness that drained the color from her world and left her wading through the slow delirium of convalescence. Her attending physician, believing a change of air might hasten her recovery, suggested she leave Southampton for a time. And so, with a curious lack of subtlety, Lillie proposed London. "I have no idea," she later wrote with mock innocence, "what led us to select the great, smoky city as a sanatorium." By early 1876, the Langtrys took up residence in Eaton Place. Lillie filled her days wandering through museums, strolling through pleasure gardens, and haunting Hyde Park, where she lingered at the edges of grand processions, hoping to glimpse a royal figure. "I had never set eyes on even a minor one," she later admitted. A year would pass before fortune twisted the key. A chance encounter with Lord Ranelagh, an old acquaintance from Jersey, led to an invitation, one that would alter the course of her life. Lady Seabright's At Home, a modest gathering, perhaps by London standards, but for Lillie, it was a portal. "It was this invitation," she later declared, "that completely changed the current of my life." In the months following Lady Seabright's party, Lillie Langtry became a sensation. The quiet girl from Jersey, who had once felt so out of place in London's glittering ballrooms, now moved through them with effortless grace. She ascended swiftly from the intimate salons of artistic patrons to the grandest drawing rooms of Mayfair and Belgravia. "There was scarcely a great house in London that I did not visit during my first season," she later wrote, with a trace of astonishment still woven into her words. She had arrived at a rare and opportune moment, when the rigid edifice of English society was beginning to loosen at its seams. By the late 1870s, the aristocracy, once a fortress of unyielding tradition, was yielding. However reluctantly, to the changing tides of wealth and influence. For centuries, the English upper class had been a tight-knit caste, bound by bloodlines stretching back through 1,500 families, their power entrenched in ancient titles and vast acres of land. But now, wealth, not birth, had become the true passport to social acceptance. American railroad heiresses and Johannesburg mining magnates' daughters married into England's grandest families, their dowries restoring crumbling mansions and resurrecting bankrupt estates. For Lillie, this quiet revolution presented an opportunity, one she seized with both hands. She was neither brash nor gaudy. By Victorian standards, she was a lady. Her husband, Edward Langtry, though disappointing in many respects, did not soil his hands with trade. His grandfather may have been a shipowner, but Edward was, by the standards of the time, a gentleman of leisure. Lillie's own pedigree, too, was respectable. As the daughter of the Dean of Jersey, she occupied a niche just below the landed gentry. Clergymen's daughters, while not aristocratic, were undeniably genteel. Moreover, her family had ties to the peerage. Yet it was not lineage that made Lillie a phenomenon. It was something more elusive, a quiet magnetism, a beauty that seemed illuminated from within. She was vivacious yet refined, sensual yet never coarse. Those who observed her in those early days noted a trace of shyness, a gentle contrast to the brazen social climbers who prowled London's drawing rooms. But if beauty and breeding could open doors, wealth was the key to staying in. And here, Lillie's fortunes faltered. Edward Langtry was not nearly as rich as she had once imagined. Like so many families of his kind, the Langtrys had ridden the swift arc from rags to riches and back again within 3 generations. Edward had no head for finance. In his efforts to keep pace with the yachting set, the millionaire sportsman who raced 300-ton cutters, he had squandered much of his inheritance. Lillie, like many Victorian wives, had been kept in the dark about their finances. But it did not take a banker to recognize the signs of dwindling wealth. They owned no grand country house, no town mansion, not even a carriage. She had entered society on foot, and society had noticed. And yet, what Lillie lacked in fortune, she possessed in something far rarer. She had become, in the breathless parlance of the day, a curiosity. The city hummed with talk of the Jersey beauty, with her golden hair and porcelain skin. She was, quite suddenly, the most sought-after woman in London. 2 of the most celebrated artists of the age, John Everett Millais and Frank Miles, recognized in her not just beauty, but an almost indefinable presence. Miles, a prolific sketch artist whose portraits of fashionable women adorned countless drawing rooms, captured Lillie first. His pencil traced the delicate arch of her brow, the curve of her lips, the soft luminescence of her skin. Within days, he completed another sketch, sold it to a printer, and watched as it was replicated in its thousands. Soon, Lillie's ethereal visage peered from shop windows across London. "My sketches of Lillie during her first London season," Miles would later write, "earned far more than I've ever made on the largest commissions for my most expensive paintings." Her next brush with fame came through Millais himself. He selected Lillie as the model for Effie Deans, the tragic heroine of Sir Walter Scott's The Heart of Midlothian. When the painting was exhibited at the Marsden Galleries in King Street, it became a sensation. Millais had not merely captured a likeness, he had created a story. The painting's sentimental charm resonated deeply with its Victorian audience soon. But it was his next portrait that would immortalize her. "She was the most exasperating subject I have ever painted," he later confessed. "For 50 minutes of each hour, she looked only beautiful, but for the other 10, she looked amazing." When the painting was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1878, it bore a deceptively simple title, A Jersey Lily. Her fame deepened as photography, still a young and enchanting art, captured her likeness. The Victorian age was at its height, and with it, an insatiable appetite for beauty. Soon her face was everywhere, from drawing rooms to shop windows to postcards. In just a year, her likeness had become as familiar as the Queen's, and all London photographers sought her out. The Jersey Lily had stepped into legend. She became a fixture in London's most exclusive circles. Invitations arrived in an endless stream. For Lillie, these were nights of transformation, where the quiet girl from Jersey became the Jersey Lily, an enchantress among England's elite. Her breathless recollections of that season shimmer with titles and names, each one a rung on the ladder of acceptance. The Duchess of Westminster invited her to the country. Lady Rosslyn offered her a seat in her carriage for a drive through the park. Lord Hartington, besotted, ruined his evening attire by wading into a marble pool, plucking water lilies to lay at her feet. Yet in every gilded room, trailing a step behind, stood Edward Langtry, her husband, her shadow. A married woman could not be invited alone, of course. Society demanded the appearance of propriety, even as it whispered behind painted fans. My husband greatly disliked all this publicity, Lillie recorded with a cool detachment, sometimes losing his temper and blaming me. Yet Edward never refused to accompany her. Whether from loyalty, resignation, or sheer inertia, he stood beside her, adrift, unmoored in a world that was no longer his own. He felt quite like a fish out of water, she remarked. A simple observation, but one that cut with the sharpness of truth. Through this kaleidoscope of parties, Lillie remained a vision of elegance, always in the same dress. The black gown she had worn to Lady Seabright's party had become her uniform, a banner of both necessity and mourning. Lord Randolph Churchill, writing to his wife Jenny, captured the murmurs of society. I dined with Lord Warncliffe last night and took in to dinner a Mrs. Langtry, a most beautiful creature, quite unknown, very poor, and they say has but one black dress. It was not merely poverty that kept Lillie in black. In December 1876, her younger brother Reggie had died in a riding accident in Jersey. Victorian mourning required not only grief, but its outward display. A shadow that clung to her, a black thread woven through the white-gloved tapestry of London society. For months, the black gown was her armor. Only when Lady Dudley, with the gentlest of nudges, suggested a change, did Lillie finally shed her mourning. The effect was nothing short of revelatory. The dress, a masterpiece of restraint, was a creation of white velvet embroidered with pearls. Its bodice, low-cut and close-fitting, clung to her frame, while the skirt, drawn back into a bustle, accentuated the length of her legs, the seductive curve of her hips. Looking back, Lillie later recalled, and judging from the sensation it caused, it must have been a striking creation. As I entered the ballroom, the dancers stopped and crowded round me, and as I pursued my way to greet my hostess, they opened out to allow me to pass. It was a scene of mythic proportions, the crowd parting like the Red Sea, all eyes drawn to the vision in white. Yet it was not merely the dress, nor even her fame as a professional beauty that caused this ripple in the ballroom. London knew that the Prince of Wales, the man whose whims could shape fashion, whose favor could make fortunes, was very interested in the delectable Mrs. Langtry. Lillie's first brush with royalty came not with the prince himself, but with two of his siblings, Princess Louise and Prince Leopold, the Queen's youngest son. Both harbored a taste for the unconventional, preferring artistic circles where bohemian ideals drifted through the air like pipe smoke. Princess Louise, at 29, was handsome and emancipated, a sculptress with a sharp tongue and an even sharper wit. Prince Leopold was a different kind of royal altogether. Slim and slight, with soulful eyes, a waxed mustache, and a wispy beard, he had the romantic air of a character stepped from a Byron poem. Known as the Scholar Prince, he possessed a marked intellectuality, but his life unfolded as a quiet tragedy, a struggle between his mother's suffocating possessiveness and his own yearning for independence. While Queen Victoria sought to keep him cloistered within Windsor's protective walls, Leopold longed for a world beyond them. He found a glimpse of that world in Lillie. The prince often visited Miles's studio to watch as the artist sketched Lillie, each line of charcoal a tribute to her beauty. On one occasion, he purchased a portrait of her, an exquisite profile with her name delicately suggested by a background of faintly penciled lines. The portrait hung above his bed, a quiet rebellion against the world that confined him. When Leopold was laid low by yet another bleeding attack, Queen Victoria arrived in his room. Her gaze fell upon the portrait of Mrs. Langtry. Without a word, the queen, who had ruled over empires, climbed onto a chair and with her own hands took it down. And with that, Lillie vanished from the walls of Windsor. Lillie's introduction to the Prince of Wales came at an intimate supper party on May 24, 1877, hosted by Sir Alan Young at his home in Stratford Place. The guest list was modest, just 10, including Mr. and Mrs. Edward Langtry. The timing was impeccable. The Princess of Wales was abroad, visiting her brother King George. The prince, newly returned from the south of France, was unencumbered. His summer had not yet begun, but his holiday spirit was already in bloom. As the guests stood, awaiting the call to supper, a ripple of murmurs spread through the room. A voice, genial and guttural, carried from beyond the doorway. "I am afraid that I am a little late." The moment held. A heartbeat later, the Prince of Wales entered. For all her poise, Lillie felt the jolt of royalty, that involuntary quiver even the steadiest hearts knew in such company. Her first impression was a blur of medals, sashes, and the glint of orders pinned to a broad chest. But when the moment came, she curtsied with flawless grace. "I greatly enjoyed watching my husband go rather stammeringly through a similar ordeal," she later admitted, the glint of mischief still in her words. At the table, Sir Alan had, of course, seated Lillie beside the prince. Beneath the glow of candelabras, Bertie plied her with his well-honed courtship, the chuckling laugh, the lingering glance, the charm that could disarm as much as seduce. Lillie knew what it meant when the Prince of Wales sought a woman's company. As she sank into her parting curtsy, she understood. His visits were not merely social calls, but declarations of interest. And an afternoon call from Bertie was never just an afternoon call. With his insatiable appetite for pleasure, he was more than just the future king. He was the arbiter of fashion, the architect of social trends, and, in no small measure, the author of a new code of aristocratic conduct. In a world where upper-class girls were expected to remain untouched until marriage, their male counterparts had always indulged elsewhere, seducing servant girls or frequenting London's countless brothels. Bertie preferred a different approach. If discretion and decorum shaped his public life, his private tastes leaned toward young married women. Women whose allure lay not just in their beauty, but in their wit, charm, and ability to move seamlessly through both the drawing rooms of Mayfair and the embrace of a lover. His influence softened society's view of adultery, transforming it from a whispered sin into an accepted convention, provided, of course, it was conducted with civility. Their affair followed a well-trodden path, its choreography as practiced as any minuet. After their flirtation at supper, a discreet letter arrived at Lillie's Eaton Place address, proposing an afternoon call. These visits were part of an unspoken ritual among the upper crust. A gentleman would arrive during the hours when husbands were safely occupied at their clubs or engaged in their own liaisons. His hat, cane, and gloves would not be left in the hall, but arranged on a chair in the drawing room, signaling that he had merely dropped in for a polite call. The scene was one of carefully curated elegance. A maid, aproned and discreet, would set the tea tray, silver polished to a mirror shine, china delicate, the cake stand laden with dainties. She would curtsy and withdraw, leaving her mistress to ring the bell only when the visit was concluded. What happened between the click of the door and the tinkle of the bell remained a matter of imagination. Sometimes it was only conversation, veiled in flirtation. Other times, the chaise longue bore witness to exchanges of a more intimate nature, albeit ones constrained by the labyrinth of corsets, lace, and the elaborate constructions of Victorian fashion. Whether during one of these afternoon calls or in the more comfortable setting of a country house weekend, it became clear that Lillie was not merely another fleeting fancy. Bertie's fascination went beyond the casual. She was not to be hidden away or whispered about. She was to be seen. Soon, hostesses understood that if they wished for the prince's company, Mrs. Langtry must be on the guest list. Where he went, she followed, not as a shadow, but as a star in her own right. There was nothing clandestine about their affair. Lillie Langtry became an openly acknowledged, almost permanent feature of the prince's life. She was not merely a passing amusement, but his first official mistress, a paradoxical role in Victorian England, where scandal and status walked hand in hand. She tread the fine line between respectability and notoriety with a poise that few could match. For Lillie, this new role brought not only attention but influence. She became a fixture in the grand houses of London, a name whispered with admiration, envy, and curiosity. But at what cost? In her later years, Lillie would confess that she had always harbored a quiet fear of the Prince of Wales. Up close, he reeked of cigars. Yet in his presence, she remained composed, pragmatic, and above all, ambitious. Like the self-made industrialists Bertie so admired, she had forged her own path. She was no mere ornament at his side, but a formidable conversationalist, a woman whose intelligence was as intoxicating as her beauty. Oscar Wilde, ever her devoted friend, captured it best. Lily's beauty has no meaning. Her charm, her wit, and her mind, what a mind, are far more formidable weapons. Years later, George Bernard Shaw would quip, "I resent Mrs. Langtry. She has no right to be intelligent, daring, and independent as well as lovely." It is a frightening combination of attributes. It was a combination the Prince of Wales found irresistible. Lily, too, found herself swept up in the currents of her own notoriety. "It would be difficult for me to analyze my feelings at this time," she later reflected. "To pass in a few weeks from being an absolute nobody to what the Scotch so aptly describe as a person. To find myself not only invited to, but watched at all the great balls and parties. To hear the murmur as I entered the room. To be compelled to close the yard gates to avoid the curious, waiting crowd outside before I could mount my horse for my daily canter in the Row. Surely, I thought, London has gone mad." Her name, once an obscure footnote in Jersey society, now coursed through the streets of the capital like an electric current. It was no longer just dowagers on gilt chairs craning their necks at society balls. London itself was enthralled. In Hyde Park, crowds surged toward her. In Bond Street, shopkeepers had to smuggle her out through back doors to escape the mobs. Even young women who happened to resemble her became unintentional martyrs to her fame. One such girl was trampled in the frenzy, carried unconscious to St. George's Hospital. Everything she touched became a trend. One evening, in a moment of absent-minded elegance, she twisted a strip of black velvet into a simple toque, pinned a quill through it, and set it atop her golden hair. By morning, milliners had copied it and displayed it in shop windows under a single, knowing label, the Langtry hat. When she wore a pink gown to Ascot, every lady of fashion scrambled to don the same shade. The days of the single black dress were over. Now, she draped herself in Worth, in silks the color of dusk and velvets heavy with embroidery. Her tea gowns shimmered with silver fox, her evening dresses sparkled with pearls, her negligées whispered with ermine. At a ball at Marlborough House, she arrived in a gown of yellow tulle, overlaid with a wide-meshed gold net, beneath which real butterflies, preserved in fragile stillness, fluttered faintly with her every movement. By morning, the prince himself had been seen stooping to gather the fallen butterflies from the ballroom floor. London's greatest artists clamored to immortalize her. Edward Poynter cast her as a Renaissance princess, draped in gold. George Frederick Watts stripped away the finery, painting her in solemn black as the Dean's daughter. Burne-Jones, inspired by her luminous health, used her face for two figures in the Golden Stair. He painted her as Dame Fortune, a cool, detached goddess turning a great wheel upon which kings and princes climbed to their apex, only to tumble into ruin beneath the weight of fate. James McNeill Whistler, ever the aesthete, saw something else in her. One afternoon, as she posed in his Tite Street studio, the critic George Smalley observed her. A vision never to be forgotten, the coloring brilliant and at the same time delicate, the attitude all grace. There was harmony and contrast all in one, the softness and the strength. For a woman who had once lived in the quietest corners of Jersey, even her home required an evolution. She and her husband Edward, who, by all accounts, remained dutifully unprotesting, moved into a more fitting residence, 17 Norfolk Street, off Park Lane. Yet, by the standards of royal mistresses past, it was a modest affair. The days when kings housed their favorites in palatial estates had long faded. This was a new era, one of discretion. A private townhouse with its own entrance and the requisite air of plausible deniability was more befitting the times. And Bertie, for all his charm, was not a man of lavish financial arrangements. He gifted expensive jewels, perhaps the occasional gown, but beyond that, Lily was expected to fend for herself. And she did. Though she later claimed to have been financially reckless, those who knew her understood the truth. She was shrewd. Where other professional beauties posed for photographs merely for vanity, Lily ensured that she profited from every print sold. Fame, after all, had its privileges. London's finest couturiers and jewelers now extended her credit, knowing that if Lillie Langtry wore their creations, so too would the rest of high society. Norfolk Street became the stage for this new life. It was here that Bertie paid his afternoon calls, and on rare occasions lingered for supper. In her memoirs, Lillie was discreet. His affability to servants was well known to all who entertained him, for he seldom passed one without a word or a kind look, she wrote. He really worked hard to make one's dinners and parties successful, an easy task with his magnetic personality. And as for her own role in it all, my only purpose in those days was to look nice and be pleasant, Lillie would say. With characteristic grace and dignity, Princess Alexandra turned a blind eye, as she had to her husband's past indiscretions. But if Bertie's previous liaisons had been fleeting, this was different. Lillie Langtry was no passing fancy. And yet, Alexandra neither raged nor withdrew. Instead, with the quiet magnanimity that defined her, she extended a kindness to her husband's mistress, welcoming her into the rarefied world of Marlborough House and Sandringham. Lillie later recalled an evening when she fell ill at a small dinner party. The princess, always considerate and compassionate, immediately told me to hurry home to bed. Half an hour later, the household physician, Francis Laking, was ushered into my room, sent by the Princess of Wales herself to tend to me. The next afternoon, as I lay resting, the butler suddenly announced Her Royal Highness. Though unwell, Lillie struggled to her feet, but Alexandra insisted she remain on the sofa while she prepared their tea. The visit was unexpectedly warm. The princess chatted graciously, the air perfumed with the scent of her signature violets. For Edward Langtry, the situation was altogether different. To be a husband cuckolded by a prince was a peculiar humiliation, one laced with contradictions. A man might feel wounded, resentful, degraded, yet to object too strongly would be unthinkable. And yet Edward Langtry was neither obliging nor resigned. Though his marriage had long ceased to be a romantic one, jealousy still flickered beneath his indolence. By nature, he was lethargic, incurious, unambitious, but when provoked, his temper could be violent. Lillie later recounted moments of sudden rage, of bitter accusations flung in drunken fury, not merely over her extravagance or ceaseless socializing, but over the one thing that placed her beyond his reach, the Prince of Wales. His discovery of the affair was neither cinematic nor scandalous. There were no confrontations, no storming of doors, no letters waved in fury. Instead, it was mundane in its treachery. Like any Victorian husband versed in quiet suspicion, Edward understood the power of blotting paper. Holding it up to a looking glass, he deciphered the ghostly imprint of a letter Lillie had written to her royal lover. Rage swelled within him. Even the ever-resilient Lillie, usually impervious to his temper, was reduced to tears. And yet, for all his fury, Edward did not demand the affair end, nor did he remove himself from its periphery. He continued to escort Lillie to grand dinners, country house weekends, and endless social engagements he loathed. Not out of devotion to her, but out of deference to the prince. But such a role required its own anesthetic. Edward, once an indulgent drinker, now clung to alcohol as his only solace. Whiskey dulled the nights spent alone. Brandy numbed the nights spent in company. There were evenings, Lillie later recalled, when he was too drunk to attend a dinner party, leaving her to scramble with last-minute apologies to hostesses who cared little for him, but everything for her. And yet, for all his grudging compliance, he refused to grant her a divorce. Even when her affair with Bertie had faded into memory, even when she had left their home, even when she had become an internationally celebrated actress, Edward Langtry would not let her go. For those intoxicating years at the height of the affair, Lillie Langtry adapted her life almost entirely to Bertie's. His world became hers, and no ritual was more central to that world than the daily spectacle of Hyde Park. This was no idle promenade. It was a living tableau, an orchestrated performance where power paraded in full display. The only stretch that mattered lay between Albert and Grosvenor Gates, where lacquered carriages rolled like polished pearls in procession, their footmen resplendent in livery, their horses high-stepping in perfect unison. Ladies swathed in silks and lace waved languidly from their barouches. Gentlemen in immaculate riding attire exchanged nods heavy with unspoken alliances. And at the apex of this moving court, Princess Alexandra. Seated in her signature claret-colored barouche, she was the embodiment of untouchable grace. Her bow, A delicate, effortless tilt of the head sent ripples through the crowd. Hats were doffed, curtsies swept, and then there was Lillie. Clad in a faultlessly tailored riding habit, a top hat perched at a rakish angle, she rode alongside the Prince of Wales, her horse Redskin, a gift from an admirer, keeping perfect pace with his. Bertie, unmistakable in the saddle of his horse, adorned with a royal red brow band, cut a commanding figure. The sight of them together sent murmurs cascading through the throng, the undercurrent of whispers as charged as the clipped rhythm of hooves on gravel. One evening, caught in the languid pleasure of the ride, Bertie showed no sign of turning back. Lillie, bound by etiquette, had no choice but to follow. By the time she returned to Norfolk Street, the city's lamps had flickered to life. It was after 9. Edward was waiting. They were due at a dinner party, and Lillie barely had time to shed her riding clothes before being bundled into an evening gown and rushed to their carriage. When they arrived, just before 10, the guests had been waiting for hours. Bertie lived for the turf, reveling in the glorious uncertainty of it all. He surrounded himself with racing men, trusted them implicitly, and took their advice as gospel. Lillie, ever the quick study, did not merely observe, she absorbed. Racing was not just a spectacle to her. It was a science, a discipline. In time, she would become a formidable racehorse owner, twice winning the Cesarewitch handicap. For me, she later wrote, the pleasures of the turf are not merely in owning horses and seeing them win. I love the routine of racing. The fresh air, the picnic lunch, the rural surroundings, all make for a delightful outing. Her ascent was swift, her social sphere ever widening. It was only a matter of time before she was presented to the Prime Minister himself, Benjamin Disraeli. The encounter took place just before Ascot. The great statesman, ever the charmer, regarded the young woman before him with amusement. "And what can I do for you, Mrs. Langtry?" he asked, a knowing glint in his eye. Lillie, without hesitation, replied, 4 new gowns for Ascot. Disraeli smiled. "You are a very sensible young woman," he said. "Many a lady would have asked to be made a duchess in her own right." It was a remark made in jest, but beneath it lay a quiet truth. Disraeli, steeped in history, understood what Lillie had not yet fully grasped. Had she lived in another era, beneath the gilded ceilings of Versailles or within the intrigue-laden corridors of the Stuart court, she would have wielded far more than mere influence. She would have had a title, an estate, a pension for life. But this was a different age. The role of a royal mistress had shrunk to the shadowed corners of private townhouses, to discreet entrances and borrowed jewels. For all her power, Lillie Langtry was still just a guest at the table, not the one setting it. For Lillie Langtry, Marlborough House was no mere drawing room. It was an arena. A celebrated beauty might dazzle for a season, but Lillie had no intention of being a passing fascination. She became a presence, her name slipping from lips in salons and supper clubs alike, spoken with admiration, envy, and the irresistible pull of curiosity. The rituals of entry to Bertie's court were an orchestrated spectacle in themselves. Gleaming carriages arrived in procession. Scarlet-clad footmen, polished as their brass buttons, attended to the elite, while pages in navy livery ushered them through a labyrinth of antechambers, where candlelight flickered over cut crystal and anticipation shimmered beneath the hum of conversation. Then, at last, came the grand entrance. Lillie, ever the diplomat, described Alexandra, the Princess of Wales, in tones of reverence, recalling her as wonderfully lovely and faultlessly dressed, seeming almost to dim the beauty of every other woman in the room. Yet, for all the grace of the princess, it was Bertie who commanded the evening, his boundless energy and geniality electrifying the space around him. One guest, attending a ball at Sandringham, would later remark that the prince was the life of the party, the antidote to every text and sermon ever preached upon the pleasure of the world, palling upon the wearied spirit. For Bertie, society was not duty but delight, and nowhere was his appetite for revelry more insatiable than at Cowes, where summer unfolded in a spectacle of sale, scandal, and sport. As London languished beneath the heavy heat of July, the aristocracy abandoned their drawing rooms for the sea, descending upon the Isle of Wight for Cowes Week, a playground of yacht races, midnight revels, and mischief thinly veiled as merriment. Lillie did not simply observe, she lived it. She raced with the same reckless thrill she brought to life itself, later recalling, How I enjoyed the excitement, crowding on sail to the verge of danger, with swirling spray drenching us to the skin. She and Bertie were frequent guests aboard the Helen, a schooner belonging to Sir Alan Young, the very man who had first introduced them. Meanwhile, aboard the Osborne, Bertie presided over his court of the highborn and the fallen. English aristocrats rubbing shoulders with dethroned emperors, exiled princes, and relics of crumbled dynasties. Among them was the Empress Eugenie, once the most dazzling woman in Europe, now a widow in exile, a living reminder of how swiftly fortune turns. But for all its grandeur, Cowes was not a place of solemn reflection. It was a playground of excess. And if Cowes had a king of mischief, it was Lord Charles Beresford. A naval officer of distinction but a prankster of impossible audacity, Beresford lived for amusement, and on one fateful evening, Lillie Langtry and the Prince of Wales found themselves unwilling players in his latest jest. It was a night of dance aboard HMS Thunderer, and at some point, Lillie and Bertie slipped away, whether for a stolen moment of privacy or something altogether more scandalous, no one could say. But Beresford, ever the opportunist, saw his chance. Knowing that the ship's cabins relied on air shafts for ventilation, he turned a lever and sealed the room shut. The air thickened. A moment's secret became a lesson in suffocation. The heat clung to their skin, their breaths turned shallow. Lillie clutched at her throat, her usual composure cracking under the growing pressure. Bertie, bewildered, fumbled toward the door. Just as their faces burned crimson with distress, the air supply was restored, along with Beresford himself grinning in the corridor. Lillie, ever the storyteller, later recounted the moment with wry amusement. Very soon, our faces became scarlet, our breathing grew difficult, and we went through the uncomfortable sensation that must be experienced by a fish out of water. Fortunately, Lord Charles did not go beyond the frightening limit, or the Beresford joke might have developed into the Beresford tragedy. A house party among Britain's aristocracy was not a mere gathering, it was a performance, its rhythms dictated by unspoken rules and rigid custom. Between 20 and 40 guests arrived, but introductions were never necessary. Anyone worth knowing already knew everyone else. The vast country estates, great halls gilded in candlelight, endless libraries perfumed with old parchment, manicured gardens winding towards secluded belvederes, were entirely at the guests' disposal, the stage upon which this rarefied world unfolded. Even the bedrooms, no less opulent, catered to every comfort but one, a bathroom. Instead, housemaids, silent as shadows, filled and emptied metal tubs behind embroidered screens, ensuring that even the act of bathing remained an exercise in discreet privilege. Yet, for all their splendor, these weekends could be a test of endurance. Meals were no mere sustenance, they were spectacle. At breakfast, silver chafing dishes gleamed beneath the morning light, offering fried, poached, and scrambled eggs, alongside bacon, sausages, mushrooms, tomatoes, kedgeree, and cold ham. Luncheon, sometimes taken as a picnic, was a banquet in miniature. Tables groaning beneath the weight of game pies, spiced meats, and wine poured without restraint. Afternoon tea was a symphony of indulgence, a delicate crescendo of cucumber sandwiches, warm scones, golden crumpets, and sugared fruit tarts. Dinner was the crowning spectacle. 10 courses, each a decadent procession, each paired with its own wine. And yet, long past midnight, another meal awaited. Cold chicken, lobster salad, and wine left temptingly within reach. For those who still felt peckish in the small hours, sandwiches were discreetly placed in every bedroom, silent offerings to the insatiable appetites of the privileged. For men, fashion was effortless. Tweed for the hunt, velvet smoking jackets for the drawing room, white tie and tails for dinner. For women, it was an unrelenting burden. A lady changed at least 4 times a day, morning dress for breakfast, sporting tweeds for a brisk ride or something lighter if remaining indoors, an elaborate tea gown for afternoon conversation, a full-length evening gown, plunging, jewel-encrusted, draped in lace, accompanied by an ostrich feather fan. While men smoked cigars and wagered fortunes over cards, women were left to write letters, exchange whispers, and entertain darlings, the carefully selected men whose sole purpose was to amuse them. For Lillie, these weekends were not an unmitigated delight. She had no patience for gossiping women, and even less for the bloodlust of the hunt. "I was once persuaded to see a stag stalked," she later recalled, But I felt so sick and sorry for the fine beast that I have never forgotten it. Instead, she immersed herself in art and antiquities, drawn to the timelessness of beauty rather than the frivolity of society. It was in these rooms that I learned to distinguish the different periods of French furniture and china, she recalled. The library was vast, filled with portfolios of rare engravings, each more exquisite than the last. She absorbed it all, her ambition refining her into something more than a celebrated beauty. She was becoming cultured, discerning, formidable. One evening, at a gathering in Alfred de Rothschild's resplendent residence, the financier drew her aside. "What shall I give you, beautiful lady?" he murmured. Lillie, without hesitation, lifted a jeweled Louis XVI snuff box, turning it over in her hands, inspecting it with the trained eye of a connoisseur. "This will do," she said crisply. Rothschild paled. Later, with wry amusement, she recalled, "He had a weak heart, and for a moment, I thought I had stopped it." Regaining his breath, he forced a smile. "No, no," he stammered. "I shall find you something much prettier." But the moment had passed. He had expected a charming fool. Instead, he found a woman who knew precisely what she wanted and was not afraid to take it. Not all of Lillie Langtry's time in England's great estates was spent cultivating intellect or influence. Beneath her polished exterior, an impetuous spirit burned bright, playful, irreverent, untamed. One host, to his growing frustration, was forced to lock away his largest silver tray after Lillie insisted on using it to toboggan down the grand staircase. Another chided her for an unladylike disregard of conventionalities. After she dismissed the groom assigned to follow her and Lord Manners on their morning ride. Such irreverence delighted the Prince of Wales. Bertie roared with laughter at her antics, drawn not only to her beauty, but to her spontaneity, boldness, and invincible zest for life, a temperament that so closely mirrored his own. Yet if house parties were a stage for laughter, they were also a theater of seduction. These weekends were as much about clandestine affairs as they were about grand feasts and glittering company. In the private world of country estates, a new aristocratic code of adultery flourished. From the moment guests arrived, gathering in drawing rooms over delicate cups of afternoon tea, the stage was set. Men, scanning the shimmering assembly, assessed which married women might offer a weekend's amusement. The courtship unfolded with elegant formality, glances exchanged across candlelit dinners, a fleeting touch on a gloved elbow, a whispered promise in the conservatory, a note slipped onto a breakfast tray, a moonlit stroll to the summer house, a volume of poetry left open on a chaise lounge, its dog-eared page betraying intention. And by nightfall, the assignations began. A skilled hostess took care to anticipate these liaisons. Married couples were often assigned separate rooms, ensuring husbands and wives had the freedom to conduct themselves as they pleased. Mrs. Langtry, for instance, was never placed far from the suite reserved for His Royal Highness. Equally, renowned philanderers were tactfully lodged far from the quarters of the blissfully, or willfully, ignorant, yet discretion was paramount. Affairs were permitted, but scandal was forbidden. Everything was all right, one errant wife later admitted, if only it was kept quiet, hushed up, covered. Indeed, the corridors of these great houses whispered with movement, the rustling of silk dressing gowns, the soft padding of slippered feet, the near-silent click of closing doors. A 6 o'clock warning bell ensured that every guest had returned to their rightful bed before the maids arrived with morning tea. But where desire reigns, folly follows. Even the Prince of Wales himself was not immune to error. One evening, a woman hesitant to accept his advances promised that she would mark her door with a rose. Later that night, Bertie, slipping into the chamber, found not his intended paramour, but a bewildered kitchen maid, nestled in the wrong bed. Not that a man of Bertie's station would hesitate to seduce a maid. Servants were seen as fair game, their resistance largely irrelevant. And yet, while aristocratic men indulged freely in extramarital affairs, they imposed a merciless moral code upon their servants. When Lord Curzon discovered that a housemaid had spent the night with a footman, he was incensed. "I put the little slut out into the street at a moment's notice," he later boasted. The double standard was absolute. For the first years of their affair, however, Bertie's attentions belonged to Lillie alone. When they were apart, he wrote to her constantly, his tone warm, indulgent, almost domestic. His letters brimmed with the trivialities of an affectionate husband, musings on the weather, the day's shooting, the results of a race. If a new beauty had caught his eye at Cowes, he was quick to reassure Lillie that he had not been tempted to flirt. Sometimes he enclosed a brace of pheasants from the hunt. At others, the coveted ticket to Ascot that Lillie had requested for a friend. For now, Lillie was his singular delight. Her ascent into society had been meteoric, but its final, undeniable confirmation came with her presentation at court. On a warm May afternoon in 1878, Lillie Langtry stood among a line of women stiff with nerves, each awaiting her moment to curtsy before the Queen. Though honored by the invitation, Lillie was uneasy at the prospect of facing Queen Victoria. By now, the Queen was well aware of her son's liaison with the striking Mrs. Langtry. Lillie, for her part, admitted she was rather afraid of the Queen, but she also understood how to navigate royal protocol. Victoria, famously averse to long public engagements, was known to withdraw early from drawing rooms, leaving the Prince and Princess of Wales to oversee the proceedings. Lillie devised a plan. She would arrive late, ensuring that by the time she was called forward, the Queen would have already retired. It was a strategy that almost worked. The mall leading to Buckingham Palace was a spectacle, a river of gleaming carriages, caparisoned horses, and footmen resplendent in gold braid. Onlookers pressed against the railings, craning for a glimpse of London's elite, their eyes darting toward jeweled and feathered women visible through carriage windows. But inside those gilded carriages, the experience was far from glamorous. It was certainly anything but pleasant, Lillie later recalled, to sit in full costume, with low neck and bare arms, in the bright sunlight for the edification of the surging crowd. Many of the women had not eaten since morning, forced to nibble on sandwiches and sip from discreetly hidden flasks, a quiet indignity rarely acknowledged in the society columns. Yet the real test of endurance began inside the palace. The procession of aspiring presentees inched forward through a series of crush rooms, their heavy court trains folded over one arm, their delicate tulle veils snagging against the brocade of their neighbors' gowns. Lillie, confident in her perfectly timed arrival, was certain that by the time she stepped forward, the Queen would be long gone. Then came the announcement. "Mrs. Langtry comes next, Your Majesty." Lillie froze. The Queen was still there. To Lillie's astonishment, Victoria had remained beyond her usual allotted time, waiting for her. "It seems," Lillie later wrote, "that she had a great desire to see me and had stayed on in order to satisfy herself as to my appearance. It was even added that she was annoyed because I was so late in passing." As Lillie approached the dais, she felt the weight of the Queen's unchanging gaze. Victoria, seated in her customary low-necked, short-sleeved black gown, wore the blue sash of the Order of the Garter, ropes of pearls at her throat, and the unmistakable glitter of diamond orders pinned to her corsage. On her head, her small diamond crown gleamed under the chandeliers, a symbol of her dominion over an empire upon which the sun never set. For all her diminutive stature, she was formidable. "I was thrilled with emotion, loyalty, and pride," Lillie later confessed, but as she sank into her deep, sweeping curtsy, the Queen barely acknowledged her. Victoria extended her hand in a perfunctory manner, her expression impassive, her mouth firmly set. No smile, no flicker of amusement, no hint of approval. In a single moment, Lillie Langtry had been measured, observed, and dismissed. In the autumn of 1878, Lillie Langtry came tantalizingly close to an unprecedented private audience with Queen Victoria. One crisp afternoon, Lillie and Edward, accompanied by Lord Strathnairn and Lady Errol, set out for Balmoral, Queen Victoria's private retreat. For Lillie, it was her first and only glimpse of the legendary estate. She found it bleak and uninteresting, a far cry from the romantic Scotland of legend. The visit was not a formal audience with the Queen. That was unthinkable. Victoria did not receive uninvited guests. Instead, as custom dictated, the group signed their names in the visitor's book, a small act of deference and acknowledgement. Yet Lillie hesitated. Despite her recent presentation at court, she wondered whether inscribing her name in the Queen's book might be a presumption. Lady Errol reassured her. Having already been received at court, it was not only acceptable but expected. So with a steady hand, Lillie Langtry wrote her name into the royal ledger. They departed without incident. Some 20 minutes later, Queen Victoria herself glanced through the book. She paused. A name stood out. "I should like to have seen Mrs. Langtry," she remarked. It was an astonishing statement, one that defied all expectation. A rider was sent out at once, galloping down the Highland paths in a desperate bid to catch the Langtrys before they were too far away. But by the time he reached Glen Tanar, they were long gone, and the opportunity was lost forever. Though Lillie never mentioned him in her memoirs, Balmoral was not merely Victoria's domain. It was also the stage for one of the most controversial figures of her reign, John Brown. By the time of Lillie's visit, Brown's presence in the Queen's household had become both permanent and fiercely debated. A rugged Highland gillie with striking features and a blunt, uncompromising manner, Brown had served the Queen for years. But after the death of Prince Albert, his role had shifted from loyal servant to something far more intimate. According to many in the Queen's circle, and even many biographers, Queen Victoria's relationship with John Brown was not one of mere companionship, but something far deeper, something that had long been whispered but never confirmed. With an insider writing, Brown was a rude, unmannerly fellow, but he had unbounded influence with the Queen, whom he treated with little respect, presuming in every way upon his position with her. It was the talk of all the household that he was the Queen's lover. He was a fine man physically, though coarsely made, and had fine eyes, like the late Prince Consort's, it was said. And the Queen, who had been passionately in love with her husband, got it into her head that somehow the prince's spirit had passed into Brown. 4 years after her widowhood, being very unhappy, she allowed him all privileges. The implication was unmistakable. Victoria, lost in grief, had found in Brown not just emotional solace, but something more. Behind the walls of secluded cottages, beyond the reach of courtly scrutiny, she had carved out a private world where her ladies-in-waiting were lodged at a distance, and Brown himself was housed in a chamber directly beside her own. It was an arrangement that defied all royal propriety, one that, according to rumor, granted Brown every conjugal privilege. If true, it was an astonishing breach of protocol, yet it fit within the paradoxes of the Victorian age, an era where outward morality was so often a mask for the far murkier realities of private life. To Bertie, however, Brown was nothing more than an interloper, a low-born Scot who had manipulated his mother's affections, and worse still, spoken to him with a familiarity no commoner should have dared assume. Their clashes were frequent, their mutual loathing one of the few tensions Victoria could never mend. When the Queen privately published more leaves from a journal of our life in the Highlands, its pages brimming with effusive praise for Brown, Bertie was appalled. He read it with mounting horror, knowing the scandal it would provoke. "You must not release this to the general public," he warned. But Victoria, imperious as ever, ignored him. The book was published. The whispers swelled into something louder. Bertie's resentment deepened. So absolute was his hatred for Brown that, upon his mother's death, one of his first acts as king was to erase every trace of the man she had so adored. Busts, statues, plaques, anything that bore Brown's name was destroyed. It was an act of calculated vindictiveness from a man rarely prone to cruelty. Even in death, Brown had not escaped Bertie's wrath. Whether Victoria and John Brown had truly been lovers will never be known. But the fact that so many believed it, that even the royal family itself was divided over the question, speaks to something deeper than mere rumor. With Lillie's rising status came an ever-expanding constellation of powerful acquaintances. At Cowes, she exchanged pleasantries with King Christian and Queen Louise of Denmark, the parents of Princess Alexandra. Signed portraits arrived from Prince Wilhelm of Glücksburg and King Oscar of Sweden, tangible proof that she was now playing at the highest levels of European society. But it was at Marlborough House that the stakes rose even higher. Over a glittering dinner, she found herself in the company of the future German Emperor and Empress, then still the Crown Prince and Princess. Even Bertie's sons, Prince Albert Victor, known as Eddie, and his younger brother, Prince George, came to know her, as she gifted them each a small token. Eddie, ever eager to please, wasted no time affixing it to his watch chain. "I had to take off my grandmother's locket to make room for it," he declared with unshaken pride. One wonders what Queen Victoria would have made of such an exchange. Not all royal encounters, however, were so light-hearted. There was, for instance, the towering figure of Leopold II, King of the Belgians, a man whose reputation for personal debauchery was whispered behind cupped hands across Europe. He found his own kingdom unbearably provincial, preferring the diversions of Paris and London, where his insatiable appetites were more easily indulged. Perhaps assuming Lillie would be as obliging as his cousin, the Prince of Wales, he arrived at her home unannounced, at the ungodly hour of 9 in the morning. Jolted from sleep, Lillie dressed hastily and rushed downstairs to find the Belgian king, drenched from the rain, waiting with unnerving patience. The visit, though prolonged, remained entirely proper, or so she later assured her readers. When he arrived at the same hour the following morning, she sent her regrets. If Leopold was persistent, Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria was relentless. The only son of Emperor Franz Joseph and the brilliant but tormented Empress Elizabeth, Rudolph had inherited his mother's restless fascination with the world beyond the rigid confines of the Habsburg court. At one party, the young prince, charming but reckless, claimed nearly every dance, his fixation bordering on the impetuous. When the royal party retired for supper, he paid no attention to his assigned companion and insisted Lillie be seated beside him instead. But if Rudolph's passion burned bright, it lacked grace. His enthusiasm as a dancer outpaced his skill, and his hands, damp with exertion, left imprints on the delicate fabric of Lillie's gown. With as much tact as possible, she gently suggested he wear his gloves. His response was blunt, graceless, and wholly unbecoming of an imperial heir. "It is you who are sweating, madam," he retorted. If she had ever entertained the notion of indulging his attentions, that moment likely put an end to it. Yet the young prince was undeterred. In the days following, he became a frequent caller at Norfolk Street. Whether Lillie encouraged his advances or merely endured them out of politeness remains unknown, but one thing is certain. Rudolph was obsessed. Years later, she reportedly recounted the moment. One evening, when his intentions became unmistakably dishonorable, she feigned outrage. With a dramatic flourish, she took the emerald ring he had just gifted her and flung it into the fire. Rudolph, horrified, dropped to his knees, frantically raking through the burning coals to retrieve it. "I couldn't have loved him after that," she later shrugged. But she kept the ring. A decade later, the world would be scandalized by the prince's grim fate. In 1889, at the Imperial Hunting Lodge of Mayerling, he shot first his young mistress, Mary Vetsera, and then himself. The tragic end of Austria's troubled heir sent shockwaves through Europe. Looking back, his fascination with doomed romance and self-destruction had already begun to manifest in London. Whether Lillie saw any deeper darkness in him at the time is unknown. But one thing is certain. She had made the right choice in keeping her distance. Whatever amusement she might have found in adding the future Emperor of Austria-Hungary to her list of admirers, she was far too shrewd to risk alienating the Prince of Wales for a fleeting indulgence. Her position depended entirely on Bertie's favor, and she understood, better than most, how precarious that kind of patronage could be. Flirtation with Rudolph may have been entertaining, but it would remain just that. And yet, even as she kept the Habsburg prince at arm's length, Lillie was engaged in a far more clandestine romance. A battered green box discovered decades later in an attic in Jersey revealed 65 letters of longing, passion, and unmistakable devotion. They were addressed to a man named Arthur Henry Jones, and in them, Lillie's carefully constructed mask slipped away. "Please, please, hurry back," she pleaded. "I want you so much." Far from the calculating social climber some had accused her of being, these letters proved that Lillie Langtry was indeed capable of love. But unlike so many women before her, she would never let love consume her. She ensured that her affair with Arthur Jones remained entirely secret. She knew better than to let sentimentality dictate her fate. If there was any awareness of this secret liaison among her peers, it was never voiced. The gossips had more than enough material to speculate on without it. News of Lillie Langtry's growing list of royal admirers had already crossed the Atlantic, fueling endless fascination. The New York Tribune, seizing upon the rumors of her connection with Rudolph, proclaimed with mock admiration that lovely Lillie Langtry has added another royal scalp to her fast-growing collection. And so, the legend of Lillie Langtry grew. Her reputation had outgrown mere beauty. She was no longer just a celebrated face, but a figure of fascination, moving effortlessly through the upper echelons of society, attracting admiration from kings and poets alike. Her friendship with the young Oscar Wilde, forged in late 1879, would later foreshadow the dramatic shift her career would take. Wilde, fresh from Oxford, had taken up residence in the untidy yet romantic home of Lillie's artist friend, Frank Miles. In that haven of aesthetic indulgence, white-paneled walls adorned with peacock feathers, blue and white china and sunflowers, he surrounded himself with a coterie of beautiful people, where art and life blurred into a single shimmering performance. Among the three women he most admired, Queen Victoria, Sarah Bernhardt, and Lillie Langtry, Wilde famously declared that he would have married any one of them with pleasure. He extolled the Queen's dignity, the actress's voice, and Lillie's unparalleled grace. Lillie, however, was less enchanted. She found Wilde grotesque, his face too large, his complexion ghostly pale, his lips coarse, his teeth discolored, his nails unkempt. His clothes, exaggeratedly unconventional, scandalized even the most progressive salons. And yet something about him held her curiosity. His voice was unexpectedly melodious, and his exuberance infectious. His mannerisms, though theatrical, were at this stage an earnest display of unpolished genius, rather than the calculated affectations he would later adopt. For Wilde, however, Lillie was a siren, not just for her beauty and wit, but for her proximity to power as the mistress of the Prince of Wales. Determined to tether himself to that dazzling orbit, he performed his admiration with theatrical devotion. He adapted a poem originally written in praise of a youthful muse into a tribute to a Lily girl, presenting her with an elaborately inscribed copy of a new Helen. When visiting her, he would stroll down Piccadilly brandishing a single lily, ensuring all who saw him understood the homage. His declarations, however, extended beyond mere poetry. On one occasion, he reportedly fell asleep on her doorstep, as if overcome by passion. After a quarrel, he was found outside the theater in tears, so distraught that attendants had to lead him away. Yet Lillie was no fool. She saw through the spectacle. Wilde was not so much in love with her as he was with her notoriety. He used her scandal to fuel his own rise, even as he sought her favor. Yet their relationship was not without warmth. Wilde, ever eager to mold the world into something more beautiful, lavished her with artistic guidance. He led her through lectures on Greek art at the British Museum, introduced her to the venerable critic John Ruskin, and even instructed her in Italian. Lillie, self-possessed and shrewd, took what interested her and left the rest. She humored him with fashion consultations, once asking his advice on a ball gown. She ultimately chose a soft black Greek dress, accented with silver crescents and diamonds, which she named Queen of the Night. Wilde, predictably, thought her far too dull for rejecting his far grander vision, one that involved a bonnet emblazoned with Venus Anadomini. But even as Wilde preened and plotted, another storm was brewing. By late 1879, whispers circulated that the Prince of Wales was growing restless. Bertie, for all his affability, had a notoriously brief attention span for love. London's social scene always had new beauties to offer. Lillie, at 26, sensed the inevitable. Perhaps seeking security elsewhere, she allowed herself to be swept into the reckless infatuation of Lord Shrewsbury. Charles Chetwynd Talbot, the 18-year-old Earl of Shrewsbury, was not merely captivated. He was consumed. Their romance, which began in July 1879, was scandalous not just for its adultery, but for the unconventional dynamic, an older, married woman and a teenage aristocrat. Shrewsbury, blind with passion, proposed they elope. Lillie, ever one to seize her fate, considered it. For a moment, she stood on the precipice of a grand gamble, one that would mean abandoning everything she had built for a fleeting promise of devotion. But fate was unkind. Shrewsbury, impulsive as he was ardent, jilted her. Just as suddenly as he had pledged himself to Lillie, he redirected his affections to another, a married society lady, Ellen Palmer Morwood. He married her soon after, leaving Lillie both abandoned and humiliated. Only months earlier, society had worshipped her. Now, sensing vulnerability, the same elite circles that had once courted her favor turned with sharpened teeth. A scandalous falsehood appeared in the papers. Edward Langtry, it was claimed, had filed for divorce, naming the Prince of Wales as co-respondent. The allegation was wholly fabricated. Edward had done no such thing, but the damage was done. Bertie, ever mindful of his reputation, could not afford the scandal. He distanced himself from Lillie, though the two remained friends. Worse was to come. Prince Louis of Battenberg had never been merely another aristocratic ornament. His lineage, though tainted by the stain of morganatic origins, was steadily ascending in European society. The Battenbergs, once dismissed as minor princelings, were proving themselves a force within royal circles, and Louis, the eldest, was among the most promising. Unlike the idle young lords who drifted from ball to ball, he had carved out a career of his own. At 14, he had entered the British Navy and distinguished himself through discipline and intellect, a curiosity in a world where privilege often bred indolence. While his peers squandered their youth in rounds of champagne and scandal, he pursued excellence, earning the grudging respect of those who once dismissed him. Yet for all his diligence, he was no ascetic. Women found themselves drawn to his deep voice, his foreign accent, the way he wore his authority lightly yet irresistibly. His cousin, the Prince of Wales, had long taken an interest in him. Bertie had a keen eye for promising young men, and Louis had reaped the benefits: lavish entertainments, introductions to society's most glittering figures, and most significantly, an invitation into the dazzling world of Lillie Langtry. Unlike Bertie, Louis was neither jaded nor cynical. He approached her not as a conquest, but with a fervor that must have been intoxicating. His admiration went beyond her beauty. He was captivated by her mind. Unlike so many admirers who parroted empty flattery, he could speak of literature, philosophy, and art with genuine passion. Their affair unfolded with discretion, far from the scandal that had surrounded her previous lovers. Edward Langtry, as ever, was conveniently absent on endless fishing expeditions, leaving Lillie and Louis to meet in the privacy of her Norfolk Street home or in the country estates of sympathetic friends who understood the nature of these arrangements. But there was no illusion of permanence. Louis, for all his intensity, understood the constraints of his position. The Battenbergs had clawed their way into aristocracy, and one misstep could send them tumbling back into obscurity. A scandalous marriage would have been an unforgivable breach. He knew it. Lillie, ever pragmatic, must have known it too. And yet, in those fleeting months, she had found another royal companion, one who offered not only admiration, but true intellectual companionship. But by autumn of 1880, her carefully curated world began to collapse. She suspected she was pregnant, not by her husband, not by the Prince of Wales, but by Prince Louis of Battenberg. In her distress, she turned not to Louis, nor to Bertie, nor to any of her admirers, but to the man who had remained steadfast through the turbulence of her affections, Arthur Jones. Desperation laced her letters as she pleaded with him to inquire at a chemist about remedies that might delay the inevitable. But there was no delaying fate. When she finally confided in Louis, his response was not his own. The Battenbergs wasted no time in closing ranks. A marriage was unthinkable. They acted swiftly and decisively. An aide-de-camp was dispatched to arrange a quiet financial settlement, and after months of delays from the British Admiralty, Louis was suddenly assigned a distant naval post. On October 16, 1880, he set sail. His ship, in a cruel twist of irony, bore the name Inconstant. With that single stroke, Lillie lost everything. The Prince of Wales had already begun drifting from her orbit, his attention diverted elsewhere. The same society that had once vied for her presence now recoiled, sensing her diminishing influence. Even her husband had become a ghost, absent in every way but name, and her creditors, long held at bay by charm and whispered promises, now demanded their due. The situation was perilous. If Edward Langtry sued for divorce and named the Prince of Wales as co-respondent, it would drag Bertie into court in a public scandal. Every move had to be calculated, every word spoken in absolute discretion. So Lillie disappeared. In the autumn of 1880, London society awoke to find her gone. With royal arrangements quietly made, she was spirited away to Paris, her pregnancy concealed beneath layers of secrecy. On March 8, 1881, Lillie gave birth to a daughter. The child was born in the utmost secrecy. Even in exile, Lillie feared discovery. She wrote anguished letters to Arthur Jones, begging for help, wrestling with impossible decisions. But the child had arrived, a living, breathing scandal in a world that had no mercy for fallen women. Lillie faced an agonizing choice. Victorian society would never accept an openly illegitimate child from a woman of her standing. At just 27 years old, she was not ready to surrender to disgrace. So, with a heavy heart, she did what so many women before her had done. She sent her daughter into hiding. The child was taken to Jersey, raised not as Lillie's daughter, but as a distant relation, a foundling absorbed into the family fold. Whether she was raised by Lillie's mother or her brother remains uncertain. But what is known is this: she grew up believing that Lillie was her aunt, not her mother. The truth would not be revealed until her teenage years, and even then, the name of her father remained a mystery. Shrouded in whispers and evasions, Lillie had saved her daughter from scandal. But in doing so, she had sown the seeds of an estrangement that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Back in London, the fallout was immediate. The same society that had once worshipped her now closed its doors. Financially, she was drowning. Her indulgent lifestyle and Edward's dwindling resources had left the Langtrys mired in debt. By late 1880, the creditors who had once extended endless favors now came knocking, demanding payment in full. Edward, once her feckless protector, was of no use. In later years, Lillie would describe him with biting dismissal, a penniless, drunken Irishman, useless to her when she needed him most. She might have retreated into quiet obscurity, dependent on the generosity of former admirers. That was the usual fate of women in her position. She had neither the temperament nor the inclination to become another forgotten mistress living on borrowed wealth. And so, she did something unthinkable. She got a job. With few options left, she resolved to capitalize on the only currency Victorian society had ever truly allowed her: her name. Encouraged by Oscar Wilde and the great Sarah Bernhardt, Lillie made a decision that scandalized the very world that had once adored her. She would become an actress. It was a gamble. In 1881, no woman of high society had ever set foot upon the stage without falling irrevocably from grace. The theater was a world apart, its actresses regarded as creatures of talent and scandal in equal measure. For those born into it, there was a degree of acceptance, but for a former darling of the aristocracy, the transition was little better than outright disgrace. The shift from being watched in admiration to being watched for entertainment was a fall in status that few would dare to endure. But for Lillie, there was no choice. Her debut was set. On December 15, 1881, the Haymarket Theatre swelled with the most fashionable of London's elite, gathered not out of goodwill, but out of a voracious curiosity to witness either her triumph or her humiliation. Even the Prince and Princess of Wales took their seats in the royal box, their presence lending the occasion an air of quiet judgment. The play was She Stoops to Conquer, a comedy of manners that had long been a favorite among British audiences. As the curtain rose and Lillie stepped onto the stage as Kate Hardcastle, the silence was deafening. For a moment, she stood before them, the weight of their scrutiny pressing upon her. Many had arrived with scorn already formed in their hearts, convinced that this would be the final act in her long, slow descent. But then, as the performance unfolded, something changed. Her voice, steady despite her nerves, carried through the theater. She was not a great actress. Her technique was unpolished, her presence more that of a poised hostess than a commanding performer. But she was compelling. Her beauty, her charm, the very essence of the Lillie Langtry legend, these remained intact. By the final act, the tide had turned. What had begun as skepticism ended in thunderous applause. The Times noted, somewhat begrudgingly, that she had overcome the feeling of prejudice, that her name alone had drawn an audience spanning all ranks of society. For the first time in history, a woman of Lillie's standing had crossed the rigid barrier between aristocracy and the stage and emerged not ruined, but reborn. Critics were measured in their praise, acknowledging her presence rather than her talent. Never a real actress, one wrote, she gradually acquired the technique, but never succeeded in touching the emotions. But Lillie was not deluded. She knew her strengths, and she played to them. She chose roles that mirrored her own persona: elegant, witty, self-assured society women, performances that required charm rather than depth. And for audiences, that was enough. They did not come to see a masterful performance. They came to see Lillie Langtry. The transition was not without its challenges. The stigma of her past still clung to her, and there were those who expected, or rather wished for her to fail. But Lillie, ever pragmatic, found a way to make the theater work for her, rather than the other way around. By mid-1882, she had assembled her own touring company, bringing performances to the provincial towns that had only known her from scandal sheets in illustrated newspapers. The gamble paid off. Each stop was sold out. The legend of the Jersey Lily was as potent in the countryside as it had been in the drawing rooms of London. Then came America. The offer arrived from Henry E. Abbey, a shrewd and ambitious American promoter. He promised her something no actress before her had ever received: a generous percentage of the gross receipts, a financial arrangement that placed her among the highest-paid performers of her time. The opportunity was irresistible. America offered something Britain no longer could: a fresh start, a new audience, a world unburdened by the weight of her past. But before she left, she made one final, brilliant move. In 1882, Lillie Langtry became the first celebrity to lend her image to a commercial product. Pears Soap, capitalizing on the fascination with her beauty, featured her face in their advertisements, claiming that the secret to her famous complexion lay in their product. Victorian consumers rushed to buy it. The campaign was a sensation. It was a stroke of genius. The idea of a famous woman endorsing a product was unheard of, and yet, Lillie had just created what would become one of the most lucrative marketing strategies of the modern age. Long before the world of film stars and fashion icons, before the golden age of Hollywood and the rise of celebrity branding, Lillie Langtry had pioneered the path that countless others would follow. By the end of 1882, she had done what few thought possible. In just over a year, she had gone from social ruin to theatrical success, from financial despair to international celebrity. And so, with her name restored, her fortune growing, and the world at her feet once more, Lillie Langtry boarded a ship bound for New York. She had conquered London, and now she would conquer America. In October 1882, New York City buzzed with anticipation for the arrival of Lillie Langtry. Oscar Wilde himself acted as her advance agent, stirring up publicity with his trademark wit. When Lillie stepped off the ship onto American soil, she found herself greeted as a star, the Mrs. Langtry, famed beauty of the English stage. High society women envied her style. Men dueled for tickets to her shows. Her American debut in New York was nothing short of sensational. Accompanied by Wilde, who was lecturing on aestheticism, and a full troupe of actors, Lillie barnstormed through the United States. Audiences packed theaters to see her in As You Like It, Hours, and The Lady of Lions. She crisscrossed the continent by rail, from the eastern seaboard to the frontier west. I can hardly put my finger on any town sufficiently important to be marked on the map in which I have not played more than once, she later boasted of these years. It was no idle brag. She truly went everywhere. Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco. Even far-flung mining outposts welcomed the Jersey Lily. One of her most ardent American admirers was Frederick "Freddie" Gabehard, a 22-year-old heir to a New York railroad fortune. Wilde introduced Freddie to Lillie in 1882, and the young man was instantly infatuated. Freddie became Lillie's devoted escort and quite possibly her lover during her U.S. tours. He lavished her with typically American excess, even commissioning a luxurious private railroad car so Lillie could travel the country in comfort. With Freddie at her side, Lillie ventured beyond the footlights to explore America's natural wonders. She was entranced by California, visiting Monterey's pine forests and the majestic Yosemite Valley with her besotted companion. California so captivated Lillie that she decided to put down roots there. In 1888, with financial help from Freddie, she purchased a ranch in Lake County, California. She named it Langtry Farms, and it featured established vineyards, orchards, and even a winery. Long before Napa Valley became synonymous with wine, Lillie Langtry was bottling her own California Red, complete with labels bearing her image. She brought in a French vintner to run the winery, marketing her Jersey Lillie claret and sherry to eager buyers. In doing so, Lillie became one of the first women vintners in California history. By deft marketing and her celebrity name, she turned the rural estate into another source of income. Between theatrical profits, endorsement deals, and land investments, Lillie was amassing a fortune, a dramatic reversal from her penniless plight just a few years prior. Lillie's American Odyssey sparked one of the quirkiest chapters in her legend, the tale of Judge Roy Bean and the Texas town of Langtry. Roy Bean was an eccentric saloon keeper and self-appointed justice of the peace in a dusty West Texas outpost. Sometime in the early 1880s, he became obsessed with Lillie Langtry, purely from her pictures and press. In her honor, Bean renamed his saloon the Jersey Lillie, spelling Lillie with 2 L's for flair. He even christened the surrounding hamlet Langtry, Texas. Although in truth, the railroad had already named it after an engineer, Bean happily spread the myth that it was named for Lillie. Styling himself as Lillie's #1 fan, Judge Bean decorated his ramshackle saloon and courthouse with her images and regaled patrons with stories of the Jersey Lillie. He would hold court beneath a portrait of Lillie, dispensing frontier justice in her name. Throughout the 1880s and 90s, Bean wrote letters to Lillie in care of her agent, inviting her to visit his far-flung opera house, as he grandly called his saloon. Whether those letters ever reached her is unclear, but Lillie later said she first learned of Judge Bean's devotion sometime during her travels. In March 1903, Roy Bean died, never having met his muse. But fate had a bittersweet twist. In January 1904, Lillie Langtry, by then in her 50s, was on a train tour from New Orleans to California and arranged to stop at Langtry, Texas. Stepping off the Southern Pacific Rail onto the dusty ground, she finally beheld the place that bore her name. Locals swarmed to greet her with tales of the late judge who had so idolized her. They showed her the Jersey Lillie saloon, preserved like a shrine. The mayor of Langtry presented Lillie with Judge Bean's 6-shooter, the very revolver he had often brandished while proclaiming his adoration for her. Touched and amused, Lillie spent a short time touring the humble site, the closest she ever came to the peculiar Texas legend built around her. It was a short visit, but an unforgettable one, Lillie wrote fondly in her autobiography. She may have missed meeting her loyal subject, Roy Bean, in life, but her drop-in capped a story that has since become Wild West lore, immortalized later in books and even a Hollywood film. By the end of 1887, Lillie Langtry had achieved what she set out to do in America. She had earned fabulous sums, established business ventures, and expanded her fame globally. More importantly, she had proven, to the world and to herself, that she was more than the prince's cast-off mistress. She was an independent, financially successful woman in an era when such figures were rare. As one contemporary observed, she soon became one of the wealthiest independent women of her time through her shrewd investments and hard work. Yet, despite all this success, personal contentment still eluded Lillie in one area. Her daughter. Little Jean Marie remained in Jersey, being raised away from her mother. Lillie rarely saw the child. By 1887, Jean was about 6. She likely believed her grandmother Emily was her mother, or at least had no inkling of Lillie's true role. Lillie provided financial support for her daughter, but emotional closeness was thwarted by the secrecy. This would have consequences years later, as we shall see. For now, as the 1890s dawned, Lillie Langtry returned to Britain in triumph. She had new challenges to tackle, running a grand London theater, breeding racehorses, navigating new love interests, and improbably, marrying into the aristocracy for a second chance at love and respectability. Back in Britain, Lillie was greeted not with scorn, but with a sort of amused admiration. In the eyes of the public, she had redeemed herself. She was no longer merely the notorious Jersey Lillie. She was an established actress and a woman of means. Over the 1890s, Lillie continued to perform on stage in both London and America, but she also expanded her offstage pursuits, some triumphant, others calamitous. As the world watched, Lillie Langtry continued her unrelenting pursuit of reinvention. One of her greatest passions outside the stage was horse racing. It was not a newfound interest. Lillie had always been an accomplished rider, but in the mid-1890s, she elevated her fascination into a serious endeavor. Settling in Newmarket, the heart of English racing, she established a stable at Regal Lodge, where she surrounded herself with trainers, jockeys, and thoroughbreds of the finest pedigree. Unlike many society women who dabbled in racing for amusement, Lillie possessed an unerring instinct for horseflesh. She did not simply fund stables. She studied bloodlines, analyzed tracks, and engaged in the sport with the same meticulous attention that had driven her theatrical success. On a tip, she imported a chestnut stallion from Australia named Merman. It was a gamble, but Lillie was no stranger to risk. Under her ownership, Merman proved a spectacular stayer, winning some of the most prestigious races in England, including the Cesarewitch Handicap, the Goodwood Stakes, the Goodwood Cup, and in 1901, the ultimate prize, the Ascot Gold Cup. It was an astonishing achievement, one that cemented her status as a formidable owner in a world dominated by men. Society had long known Lillie as a daring rider and whip. Now she was making her mark as one of the few female racehorse owners to compete at the highest level. The racing establishment took notice, even naming a stakes race at Goodwood in her honor, a race that continues to be run today. Yet, as in all things, the heights of triumph came with their inevitable reversals. Fortunes in racing were as unpredictable as those in the theater. Some of her purchases proved poor investments, and injuries to key horses drained her finances. By 1919, she would sell off her stable and part ways with Regal Lodge. But in the 1890s, racing was more than an investment. It was a thrill, a statement of defiance, and above all, proof that she could succeed in any world she chose to enter. By day, she rode in her racing silks. By night, she returned to the stage. The theater, once a necessity for survival, had become a true vocation. In 1891, she embarked on a daring new project, leasing London's St. James's Theatre to star in As You Like It, playing the lead role of Rosalind. If critics had once scoffed at her abilities, they now found themselves faced with a woman who had refined her craft, who had honed her presence beyond mere beauty. The show sold out for 4 months. Buoyed by this success, she turned to a grander challenge, Antony and Cleopatra, a production that saw her cast as Shakespeare's most intoxicating queen. Many doubted she could embody the grandeur and tragedy of the role, but opening night proved otherwise. The Daily Telegraph declared her the finest Cleopatra of our time, noting the 14 curtain calls she received before a roaring audience. Perhaps the critics were generous, perhaps the spectacle of the costumes and staging carried her performance, but none could deny that it was a triumph. Lillie had never been one to rest on her laurels. With the wealth she had accrued, she made a bold move, one that no woman of her time had yet attempted. In 1901, she purchased the Imperial Theatre in London, pouring nearly £50,000 into its refurbishment. To own a theatre outright was almost unheard of for a woman, an assertion not only of financial power, but of artistic control. She envisioned producing plays, cultivating talent, and shaping the theatrical landscape as more than just a performer. But even Lillie Langtry, for all her instincts and audacity, could not will the theater into success. The Imperial struggled. Perhaps the location was poor, perhaps the productions failed to resonate, or perhaps even she could not bend fortune to her will forever. Within a few years, the enterprise collapsed, and she was forced to sell the theater at a significant loss. It was a blow, but one she bore with characteristic pragmatism. If she had learned anything in life, it was that reinvention was always possible. And so, as one chapter in her life ended, another began. In the late 1890s, she found herself drawn into a new romance, one that would, in time, lead her to yet another transformation. Her lover was Hugo de Bathe, a striking young man nearly 20 years her junior, whose charm and aristocratic pedigree made him a fixture in fashionable society. Their relationship was whispered about in drawing rooms, but it was not the difference in their ages that fueled the gossip. Rather, it was a peculiar rumor that refused to be silenced. That Hugo had first courted Lillie's daughter, Jeanne-Marie, only to become enamored of the mother instead. Whether the story was true or a fabrication of society's ever-wagging tongues was immaterial. The fact that it was believed spoke volumes of Lillie's enduring allure. Even as she approached middle age, she remained captivating, a woman whose presence still commanded attention, admiration, and most of all, curiosity. For Hugo, the attraction was immediate and unwavering. For Lillie, the appeal was more complex. She had spent over a decade proving to the world that she could stand alone, that she needed no man to define her. And yet, Hugo offered something no career, no racehorse, and no theater could provide: an unspoken return to the aristocracy that had once cast her out. As Lillie Langtry grew ever wealthier and more self-sufficient, her estranged husband, Edward Langtry, drifted further into destitution and obscurity. Years had passed since they last laid eyes on each other. Their only remaining connection came through George Lewis, the famed solicitor who dutifully sent Edward his quarterly £25 allowance, money that vanished into drink. With each installment, Lewis would also pass along Lillie's latest petition for divorce, and each time Edward refused. The man who had once stood proudly beside his dazzling wife in the drawing rooms of Buckingham Palace and Marlborough House had become a shadow of himself, shuffling between lodging houses, his days spent idle and drunk. Yet his devotion to Lillie remained undiminished. For a time, he lived in Holyhead, tracking the schedules of steamers and trains, knowing precisely when she would pass through on her way to Dublin. Hours before her arrival, he would pace the platform in anxious anticipation, only to flee at the last moment. Instead, he would summon a porter. "Boy," he would whisper, his voice trembling, "watch her for me. Tell me how she looks. Does she still shine? What is she wearing? Be careful about her dress and tell me everything." Then he would disappear, leaving the young messenger to report back with reverence and pity. Detective Inspector Perkins, stationed at Holyhead, witnessed these pitiful episodes firsthand. After the train or boat had gone, he later recalled, he would return and question the porter, sobbing as if his heart would break at every detail. I have seen the porters themselves brought to tears at the sight of his despair. By 1893, Edward Langtry had taken lodging in Southampton. It was there, in 1897, that he learned, likely from George Lewis, that Lillie had finally secured her divorce. A judge in Lakeport, California, where she held property as an American citizen, had ruled in her favor. The decree, however, was dubious. English law did not recognize divorces granted in foreign courts, and rumors swirled that had Lillie remarried in Britain, she could have been prosecuted for bigamy. The news sent Edward into a state of deep agitation. He became extremely unhappy, a friend recalled. On September 29th, he abruptly announced his departure for London, telling Collins that he intended to meet a Mr. Arthur Greenwood for a journey to Belfast and Glasgow. What happened next remains a mystery. In London, Edward met Greenwood as planned, and together they traveled to Liverpool, where they boarded a ferry to Belfast. During the crossing, a steward found Edward sprawled on the deck, bloodied and bruised, his nose fractured. The cause of his injuries was uncertain. Some suggested he had stumbled on a step entering the smoking room, while others whispered of something more sinister. Greenwood took him to the Royal Hospital in Belfast before disappearing without a trace. By the time Collins arrived from Southampton, Edward had already discharged himself and was en route back to London. His condition deteriorated rapidly. In the early hours of October 3rd, he arrived at the station hotel in Crewe, his face heavily bandaged, his movements unsteady. He asked for a room but soon emerged again, claiming that strangers were lurking inside. When he was refused a drink, he blinked in confusion and muttered, "Oh, is it night?" By morning, he was back at the hotel, pleading again for alcohol, 2 bottles of bitter. Again, he was refused. Later that day, Detective Inspector Perkins, now stationed in Crewe, found him wandering the station platform. His injuries were so severe that Perkins barely recognized him. "Langtry, how did this happen?" he asked. Edward's answer was cryptic. "They thought they knocked me out this time, but they didn't." Drunken rambling or genuine accusation? The words ignited speculation. Had someone tried to do away with him? And if so, why? There were those who murmured that his death would have been most convenient for Lillie and her plans to remarry. With Edward gone, all complications would disappear. Whatever the truth, Edward's coherence unraveled. He spoke wildly to anyone who would listen, lamenting that his wife had divorced him in the colonies, seeming to have no sense of where he was meant to be. Soon after, he was taken before a magistrate and committed to Upton Asylum near Chester. 10 days later, on October 15th, 1897, he was dead. The post-mortem revealed an effusion of blood on the brain, likely caused by his fall aboard the ship. There was little reason to suspect foul play, but accusations of neglect were harder to dismiss. When he died, Edward Langtry had precisely 11.5 pence to his name. By cruel contrast, just days earlier, Lillie had won a considerable sum when her horse Merman triumphed in the Cesarewitch. And it was she, after all, who had once married Edward for his wealth. Sensing the public's growing ire, Lillie moved swiftly. George Lewis issued a statement. Mrs. Langtry states that, since her separation from her husband many years ago, she has regularly provided him with an adequate allowance. As soon as she learned of his condition, she immediately forwarded money for his immediate needs. This allowance was in addition to his income from Irish property. Notably, she referred to a separation, never a divorce. There was no need to stir that pot any further. Edward Langtry was buried in the Chester Cemetery, his funeral attended by a great crowd eager for a glimpse of his famous former wife. She did not appear. Instead, she sent a wreath of lilies of the valley, tied with a conventional purple ribbon, not, as some claimed, in her racing colors of fawn and blue. The card said simply, "In remembrance, Lillie Langtry." It was a farewell both distant and intimate, an epitaph that said everything and nothing at all. The Daily News, writing of his funeral, offered its own assessment. In an evil hour, he was caught in the whirlwind of London fashion, and being anything but a swimmer and having no artificial supports in fortune, he was quickly on his way to ruin. Those who remember him years ago, a gentleman-like nobody, with a genial, confiding manner that seemed to mark him one of the crew of the Good Intent, can but lament his miserable end. 2 decades earlier, Edward Langtry had watched his wife drop her first curtsy to the Prince of Wales at a grand supper party. How directly had that fateful meeting led to his lonely, penniless death in the Chester Asylum? And do you think Lillie had anything to do with his untimely demise? By 1899, Hugo de Bathe had asked Lillie to be his wife on July 27th of that year in a quiet private ceremony at St. Saviour's Church in Jersey, the very church where she had wed Edward Langtry 25 years earlier. Lillie Langtry, now 46, married 28-year-old Hugo de Bathe. The only witness besides the officiants was her daughter, Jean Marie, then 18. It was a poignant full-circle moment. Mother and daughter, long separated, together at the altar. Did that day mark a reconciliation between them? Perhaps, in some tentative way. Jean had learned the truth of her parentage a few years earlier, when family friend Margot Asquith had let slip that her mother was not her Aunt Lillie, but in fact Lillie Langtry herself, and that her father was Prince Louis of Battenberg. When Jean Marie questioned Lillie on this, Lillie replied coldly, "Would you rather your father were a penniless Irish drunk?" As the Victorian age gave way to the Edwardian era, Lillie, now Lady de Bathe, began to retreat from the frantic pace of her stage career. But retirement did not come at once. Even in her 50s, she remained a commanding presence on the international stage, embracing vaudeville as the theater world evolved. In 1906, at age 53, she made her vaudeville debut, performing dramatic monologues and sketches that suited an actress of undimmed charisma. Audiences still flocked to see her, drawn by the enduring legend of the Jersey Lillie. She remained ever adaptable, ever inventive. It is said that during this period, she inadvertently gave rise to the now famous red carpet tradition. Annoyed by the dust that clung to her costumes as she moved from her dressing room to the stage, Lillie requested a colored carpet be laid down to protect her gown. The theater obliged, choosing red, and so a symbol of prestige was born. The world was changing. By the 1910s, war consumed Europe, bringing upheaval and transformation to every corner of society. Now in her 60s, Lillie contributed as she could, appearing at charity benefits and lending her name to Red Cross efforts. Her husband, Sir Hugo de Bathe, served as an ambulance driver on the French front lines, while Lillie, living primarily in Monaco for its warm climate and favorable taxes, organized aid for soldiers recovering on the Riviera. Though no longer in the daily spotlight, she remained engaged with world affairs and aligned herself with the movement she had quietly embodied all her life, the fight for women's rights. She had, in her own way, always defied the constraints placed upon her gender, fighting to control her own wealth, refusing to be dictated to by men and forging a career on her own terms. As suffrage movements swept across Britain, she openly supported the cause. In 1908, she joined the Actresses Franchise League, advocating for women's voting rights alongside luminaries such as Ellen Terry and Sybil Thorndike. Though she was not militant, her stance was firm. "Every woman is entitled to her independence," she declared. "It is her right to ignore the dictates of fashion and dress in a manner most becoming to her own character and personality." In her 70s, Lady de Bath wrote a spirited essay arguing that equality must extend beyond the vote to personal freedoms, including something as seemingly trivial as clothing choices. The woman who had once stunned London in a simple black dress was now championing a woman's right to live and dress as she pleased. Victorian hypocrisy had met its match in Lillie's lifelong refusal to be constrained. Yet for all her public confidence, there was one loss she could never fully reconcile: her estrangement from Jean. After Jean's marriage in 1902, mother and daughter grew increasingly distant. As one contemporary account put it, they were largely estranged for some years. Jean, ever aware of her place in polite society, sought to avoid association with her mother's infamous past, fearing it might hinder her own acceptance. A misunderstanding at the time of Jean's wedding. Some whispered that Lillie had upstaged the bride, others that long-buried paternity secrets had caused friction, led to an abrupt severance of ties. Jean distanced herself, and Lillie, deeply wounded, found herself powerless to change it. She was disappointed, a friend later recalled. She did not speak of it often, but it weighed on her. Over the years, Jean permitted occasional communication, a formal letter here, a polite acknowledgement there, but a true reconciliation never came. Even when Lillie fell gravely ill in 1929, Jean did not come to her side. Jean lived until 1964, yet mother and daughter remained strangers to the end. In 1919, with World War I over and Britain forever changed, Lillie sold her beloved regal lodge and her English properties. At 66, she settled permanently in Monaco, purchasing a villa she named Le Lys, French for the Lily, a gentle nod to the moniker that had followed her for a lifetime. There, amid gardens that tumbled toward the Mediterranean, she passed her final decade in relative peace. Sir Hugo spent much of his time elsewhere, dividing his days between the south of France and England. Their encounters were infrequent but cordial, a marriage in name more than companionship. Visitors to the villa found Lillie still gracious, sharp, and lively in conversation, her wit as crisp as ever. She tended her roses, entertained guests with old stories, and, at long last, put her life to paper. Her memoir, published in 1925, was a collection of glittering anecdotes, princes, poets, and painters passing through the pages like ghosts of another time. It was not a tell-all. Lillie remained selective in what she revealed, choosing nostalgia over scandal. In it, she reflected, "I do not regret one moment of my life." It was a fitting sentiment. Lillie Langtry had lived boldly, and now, in her final years, she seemed at peace with all that had come before. In January 1929, Lillie caught a cold that worsened into bronchial pneumonia. Her housekeeper remained by her bedside as she weakened. The once dazzling Jersey Lillie, who had captivated kings and conquered continents, now lay quietly in Monte Carlo, her life gently ebbing away. "I know I am at the end," she said. "I shall never get better." Before dawn on February 12, 1929, at the age of 75, Lillie Langtry died peacefully. Her last request was to be buried in Jersey, in her parents' tomb, returning at last to the island of her birth. Even in death, she was met with drama. A fierce winter blizzard delayed her body's passage across the channel. It was not until February 22, 1929, that she was ferried home, where crowds, undaunted by the cold, braved the gales to pay their respects as she lay overnight in St. Saviour's Church. The next day, Lillie Langtry was laid to rest in the family vault, her grave surrounded by flowers despite the snow. The Jersey Lillie had come home. Even as Britain navigated the turbulence of the 20th century, newspapers made space for appreciations of Lillie Langtry. The Daily Mail hailed her as one of the most famous beauties of the closed century. But in the end, who was Lillie Langtry? She began as a small girl from Jersey, eyes bright with dreams of silk dresses, glittering ballrooms, and distant palaces, longing desperately for a life far beyond her narrow shores. And those dreams, in time, came true. Beyond measure, beyond imagining. But each dream exacted its own silent price. For every fortune won, another quietly vanished. For every lover who whispered promises in the dark, Bertie's royal passion, Prince Louis's reckless devotion, there was another whose whispers haunted her in daylight, like her husband Edward Langtry, alone and broken in an asylum, or Jeanne-Marie, the hidden daughter she quietly sacrificed to preserve the very fame she craved. She dazzled crowds, inspiring poets and painters, yet behind society's glittering veil she remained curiously alone. Beauty fades, applause grows silent, wealth slips inevitably through careless fingers. Lillie Langtry lived long enough to see adoration cool into indifference, to outlast kings, rivals, lovers, and finally, even her own legend. The scandals that once defined her dissolved quietly into memory, until at last the Jersey Lily became simply Lady de Bath, tending roses under the warm Monaco sun. Perhaps, kneeling in her garden, she finally understood. Life's greatest pleasures are not found in the adulation she chased, nor in beauty destined inevitably to fade, but rather in the quiet fragrance of flowers, the warmth of sunlight on aging skin, the sweetness of ordinary moments spent without regret. We dream, we gain, we lose. Yet in the end, what matters most is not what we have conquered, but what we have left behind. Echoes of laughter, quiet gestures of grace, the whispers of kindness remembered when all else is forgotten. Lillie Langtry's life whispers this truth through time, that perhaps our richest reward lies not in becoming great, but in returning at last to who we truly are. Simpler, quieter, wiser, and finally at peace, both with ourselves and the world. I hope few women in history dared to live as boldly as Daisy Warwick, a woman who scandalized an empire, seduced a prince, and transformed from glittering heiress to unapologetic rebel. An heiress at just 3, selected by Queen Victoria for a royal match, Daisy defied the Queen and instead became the mistress of his brother, the future King Edward VII. 4 children by 3 different men, all while married to one. She danced on the knife's edge of respectability, shattering conventions and scandalizing society. But Daisy didn't stop there. From dazzling the highest echelons of the aristocracy, she plunged headfirst into the fight for socialism and women's suffrage, campaigned as a Labour MP, and dared to blackmail the royal family with love letters from the king himself. This is not just a story of privilege. It's a tale of rebellion, reinvention, and the audacious life of a woman who refused to bow to anyone. From glittering ballrooms to fiery speeches and the ruins of her fading fortune, Daisy Warwick burned through her world like a comet, leaving scandal, heartbreak, and revolution in her wake, perhaps forever changing the course of the monarchy. If you like stories like this, please consider subscribing. As a small channel focusing on amazing women throughout history, your support really matters. And now let's get into the scandalous life of Daisy Warwick. Frances Evelyn Maynard, eternally and simply Daisy, came into the world on December 10, 1861, her name a whisper of innocence against the formidable weight of her lineage. Born into a Victorian age, gilded with privilege yet caged by rigid expectations, she was a child of contradictions, destined to both epitomize and rebel against the society that shaped her. Her father, the Honourable Charles Maynard, was the heir to Easton Lodge, a sprawling Essex estate steeped in pastoral beauty and aristocratic grandeur. Her mother, Blanche Fitzroy, bore the distinguished bloodlines of 2 royal bastards, descending from Charles II through the Grafton and St. Albans lines. Daisy's birth was not merely a family affair. It was the continuation of a dynasty, woven into the intricate tapestry of the British aristocracy. Her father, Charles, seemed less a man than a character sprung from the fevered imagination of a romantic poet. With fiery hair, blue eyes alight with mischief, and a Byronic flair for the dramatic, he lived as though life itself were a series of grand performances. Tales of his audacious exploits lingered like echoes through the halls of Easton Lodge. He once leapt his horse over a banquet table set with crystal and china, landing cleanly to the gasps of astonished guests. In Spain, he scandalized a bull ring by vaulting onto the back of a charging bull, eliciting both outrage and awe. Yet his appetite for spectacle was matched by a recklessness that courted ruin. For Daisy, he would remain a mythical figure, etched in childhood memories as larger than life and impossible to truly know. Her mother was the calm to Charles's tempest, a woman of unshakable poise whose quiet strength would come to define her role as matriarch. Tragedy struck in 1865 when Charles died suddenly, leaving her a widow at 28, with 3-year-old Daisy and her infant sister in her care. As if the gods had not exacted enough, the third Viscount Maynard, Daisy's grandfather, died shortly thereafter, thrusting the young girl into the role of heiress to a vast fortune and legacy. At an age when most children were content chasing fireflies, Daisy inherited an estate that yielded £30,000 annually, a sum that would surpass £750,000 today. Her golden curls and wide, intelligent eyes made her a striking figure, but her newfound wealth turned her into a lightning rod for envy and intrigue. Jealousy brewed within the extended family, manifesting in pettiness that bordered on absurdity. When the Viscount's will was read, disinherited relatives could only express their resentment in the most childish of gestures, hurling pats of butter at his portrait in a moment of futile defiance. The episode became family lore, a stark reminder that privilege rarely came without its share of detractors. In 1866, Blanche remarried, choosing as her second husband the urbane and affable Lord Rosslyn. A man of quick wit and magnetic charm, Rosslyn held the rare distinction of entertaining Queen Victoria, coaxing laughter from the famously dour monarch with his sharp anecdotes. His presence transformed the Maynard household into a lively, bustling enclave, his 5 children from a previous marriage weaving their energy into the fabric of Daisy's young life. Yet for all its vitality, Victorian parenting remained a detached and exacting affair. Children were viewed less as individuals and more as ornaments, showcased at dinner parties, but largely relegated to the care of governesses. Daisy would later describe herself and her siblings as animate toys, charming curiosities brought out for display, but otherwise left to their own devices. Daisy's education, like her upbringing, reflected the rigid norms of her class. Lessons in French, German, and Italian were designed to polish her conversational grace, while piano scales and poetry recitation honed her feminine allure. Deportment was drilled into her until her posture rivaled the marble statues in the drawing room, her every movement a reflection of aristocratic discipline. Sundays were spent in the family chapel, where even the seating arrangements reflected the social hierarchies Daisy had already begun to question. How, she once pondered, could God regard the table of precedence with approval when all were said to be equal in his eyes? Beneath the veneer of aristocratic refinement, however, lay a restless mind. Daisy devoured books that extended far beyond her prescribed curriculum, immersing herself in history and philosophy with a hunger that belied her young age. She cultivated what she later called a just sympathy and an open mind, qualities that would guide her far beyond the gilded confines of Easton Lodge. In the grand halls of her childhood, every shadow seemed to whisper both privilege and burden, expectation and possibility. Even then, Daisy began to dream of a life that would not simply unfold as dictated by wealth or tradition, but one she might shape with her own will and conviction. Daisy's teenage years offered her a tantalizing glimpse into the glittering world of Victorian high society. One of these moments came during a visit to the famed artist Frank Miles's studio. Among canvases of aristocratic muses, Daisy encountered a woman who seemed to embody the era's ideal of beauty. Lillie Langtry, the celebrated Jersey Lily, was the kind of beauty that defied Victorian convention. Her dark, glossy hair framed a face luminous with charm, and her bright, intelligent eyes seemed to invite secrets. She captivated everyone in the room, including Daisy, who couldn't help but be drawn to her effortless elegance and quick wit. Later, at Lord Rosslyn's invitation, Lillie joined a dinner at their London home. There, as Daisy told it, Lillie dazzled everyone with her effortless charm with her uninteresting fat husband in tow. For Daisy and her sisters, Lillie was more than a visitor. She was a revelation. They adored her, leading her on pony rides and adorning her hats with flowers. Daisy would later reflect that she saw in Lillie not just beauty, but a charisma that was almost otherworldly. Yet their friendship held an unspoken foreshadowing. The woman Daisy idolized in her youth would, years later, be eclipsed by Daisy herself as she stepped into the role of the Prince of Wales's mistress, a position fraught with scandal and history. As Daisy grew older, her beauty began to draw attention in ways she had never anticipated. It came as a deep and almost incredible surprise to me, she wrote, to find in men's eyes an unfailing tribute to a beauty I myself had not been able to discern. Victorian fashions may have obscured youthful allure with frizzled hair and stiff gowns, but Daisy's golden hair, stormy blue eyes, and refined features made her stand out. While Lillie Langtry radiated untamed allure, Daisy's beauty required refinement. Well-coiffed hair and elegant clothes brought her understated charm into full bloom. The first man to fall under her spell was Francis Greville, Lord Brooke, heir to the ancient earldom of Warwick. He was 23 when he met Daisy, then just 16. But the age gap did little to temper his infatuation. Within weeks, Brooke sought the permission of Daisy's parents to propose. However, Daisy's stepfather, Lord Rosslyn, had loftier ambitions. A close friend of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, Rosslyn envisioned Daisy as a royal bride. Through Disraeli, Rosslyn ensured that Daisy came to the attention of Queen Victoria, who summoned her to Windsor Castle for a formal inspection. The visit to Windsor was as daunting as Daisy had feared. The air of formality was suffocating, the silence broken only by the soft clinking of silverware at a dinner where no one dared to laugh or speak above a whisper. Queen Victoria entered swiftly, her penetrating gaze assessing the young girl. After dinner, the Queen interrogated Daisy about her interests, music, art, her readiness for a public debut. Daisy, shy and uncertain, managed to answer, but she left Windsor feeling overwhelmed. It was clear, though, that the Queen considered her a suitable match for her youngest son, Prince Leopold. Daisy's feelings were less certain. She respected Leopold, whose delicate health and artistic inclinations made him seem more a friend than a suitor. During a house party at Claremont in early 1880, Leopold revealed his own doubts. Confiding in Daisy, he admitted his heart belonged to another woman. For Daisy, it was a moment of relief and clarity. Her heart was drawn to the steadfast and devoted Lord Brooke, whose quiet strength contrasted with the intrigues of the court. It was during a rainy walk in Surrey that Brooke proposed. Their boots sank into the mud as Brooke, ever earnest, offered his heart. Beneath the shelter of a wide umbrella, Daisy accepted, sealing their engagement. Lord Rosslyn, though disappointed to see royal ambitions dashed, reluctantly gave his blessing. Queen Victoria, however, was furious. Summoned again to Windsor, Daisy faced the monarch's wrath. Victoria demanded an explanation for her rejection of Leopold. Yet, despite her youth, Daisy stood firm. "I have chosen Lord Brooke," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the Queen's disapproval. For the first time, Daisy demonstrated the quiet defiance that would come to define her life. Queen Victoria, unwilling to risk a scandal, begrudgingly accepted her decision. The engagement marked the end of Daisy's adolescence and the beginning of her transformation into one of Edwardian society's most captivating women. It also hinted at the independence and determination that would make her both celebrated and controversial, a woman who, even at 17, refused to let anyone, not even a queen, dictate the course of her life. Daisy and Lord Brooke announced their engagement at a glittering ball in Grosvenor House in June 1880, marking the pinnacle of Daisy's debut season. The young heiress basked in the whirl of high society, later writing, "I was feted, feasted, courted, and adored in one continual round of gaiety." Her beauty and fortune drew throngs of admirers, but none rivaled Brooke's steadfast devotion. Their wedding on April 30th, 1881, in Westminster Abbey, was a spectacle of unmatched brilliance, described by society chroniclers as the most dazzling wedding of a dozen seasons. Prince Leopold stood as best man, while the guest list sparkled with royalty, including the Prince of Wales himself. Queen Victoria, though absent from the ceremony, begrudgingly acknowledged the union. Summoning the newlyweds to Windsor Castle during their honeymoon, she insisted that Daisy appear in her wedding gown, orange blossoms intact. The Queen pronounced the dress enchanting, and in an uncharacteristic gesture, requested a spray of blossoms as a keepsake, a fleeting glimpse of sentimentality in an otherwise chilly relationship. As Lady Brooke, Daisy stepped fully into the glittering world of late Victorian aristocracy. Her first season as a married woman heralded 15 years of unrelenting social activity. Daisy embraced the whirl of grand balls, glittering dinners, and fashionable gatherings with abandon, admitting, "I lived in and for the moment." Among the dashing officers of the Guards and Blues, she was a radiant star. But for her husband, the sight of her captivating so many others was both a source of pride and private anguish. Deeply in love, he trusted her implicitly, even as she grew restless in the gilded cage of their marriage. The couple took possession of Easton Lodge, Daisy's ancestral home, unlocking her considerable inheritance. Though admired for its blend of Elizabethan charm and mock Elizabethan flair, Daisy found the manor insufficient for her rising social ambitions. She embarked on an ambitious renovation, transforming it into what she called a flamboyant pseudo-Gothic palace. The house soon became a beacon of Victorian excess, hosting a steady stream of elite guests. Youth, wealth, and Daisy's seemingly inexhaustible fortune fueled the Brookes' extravagant lifestyle. To be an agreeable young man, well-mannered, with a modest independence and some real skill at sport, was to have the very best of times, Lord Brooke fondly recalled. Their days unfolded like a glittering carousel. Grand balls, glittering dinner parties, Cowes Week, and jaunts to the French Riviera. Amid this endless indulgence, Daisy thrived, her magnetism elevating every occasion. Of all the diversions Victorian life offered, Daisy adored hunting most. The thrill of the chase suited her increasingly daring nature. Clad in elegant side-saddle attire and her signature bowler hat, she cut a striking figure on the hunting field, her audacity earning admiration and occasional disapproval. One audacious incident at Windsor Castle solidified Queen Victoria's growing disdain for Daisy. Invited to stay at the royal residence, Daisy found herself restless and eager to attend the Essex hunt races. After the Queen's stiflingly formal dinner, a small affair attended by Princess Beatrice and a lord-in-waiting, Daisy hatched her plan. Rising before dawn, she donned a vivid pink hunting coat, a bold fashion statement of her own invention, and summoned a carriage to take her to the station. The lord-in-waiting, bound by duty to escort her, was scandalized by her audacity, and the commotion soon reached the Queen. Peering through her window, Victoria caught sight of Daisy boarding the carriage in her flamboyant coat and was aghast, referring to Daisy as fast, the word dripping with moral disapproval. The incident cemented the Queen's opinion of Daisy as a symbol of the self-indulgence and frivolity she so despised in the aristocracy. Beneath her tireless social facade, Daisy's admiration for high society began to show faint cracks. In later years, she would echo Queen Victoria's criticisms, though from a different perspective. The majority of society disliked making the effort necessary to appreciate books, pictures, music, or sculpture, she wrote. What they disliked, they distrusted. Yet for now, Daisy remained blind to the wider injustices of her world. Poverty was personified by her servants, whose crisp aprons and deferential smiles seemed to embody contentment. Lord Brooke would later reflect on their insulated world with poignant candor. Social problems were apparently unknown. I hadn't heard of any, and the right of a young man to make the most agreeable use of his youth went unchallenged. But the Brookes' glittering world, though dazzling, was not impervious to cracks. Beneath the surface of their golden existence, the seeds of scandal and transformation quietly waited, ready to shatter their world and reshape Daisy's destiny. Occasionally, a flicker of unease surfaced. Riding home across open fields, she glimpsed laborers bent beneath their burdens, trudging back to dim cottages. Yet such moments were fleeting. Like her peers, Daisy believed that charity, bazaars, blankets for tenants, forgiven rents, was balm enough for a world divided by station. Class, after all, was divinely ordained. The Victorian hymn, "All Things Bright and Beautiful," echoed through drawing rooms. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lowly, he ordered their estate. It was a gilded world, blind to its edges, and Daisy moved through it untroubled. Yet beneath her measured acts of virtue a hunger smoldered, not for piety, but for life, passion. Her encounters with the Prince of Wales, Bertie, were fleeting in those early years, tantalizing in their brevity. At Sandringham, during the clatter of shooting parties, Daisy caught only glimpses of him, laughing, larger than life, surrounded by women far bolder than she. At a ball hosted by the Duke of Edinburgh, Bertie invited her to dance. Daisy, radiant in crimson silk and framed by her striking blue eyes, might have entranced any man alive, yet she later admitted, "I doubtless seemed shy and stupid." The prince's attention drifted elsewhere, drawn to society's parade of beauties. Miss Chamberlain, nicknamed Miss Chamberpots by the sharp-tongued Alexandra, and Mrs. Cornwallis West, a woman renowned for her near-unearthly allure. Bertie's passions, of course, were not confined to ballrooms. Paris knew him well, from the shadowed music halls to the brothels. Even among his libertine circle, his antics drew murmurs. At a late-night can-can led by the Duchess of Manchester, Crown Prince Rudolph of Austria muttered darkly, "The waiters must not see their future king make such a clown of himself." For Daisy, the prince's world was intoxicating, alien and electric, revealing indulgences that both appalled her propriety and thrilled her spirit. Fate, though, would soon draw her far closer to Bertie's orbit. By the mid-1880s, Daisy was no longer the shy girl in crimson silk. She had learned society's unspoken rules, where marriage was but a facade and extramarital affairs a whispered norm. "From the beginning of our life together, my husband seemed to accept the inevitability of my having a train of admirers," she wrote later. It was all a great game. But games carry stakes, and soon Daisy would play her hand with dangerous consequence. Among the admirers who circled her, none burned brighter than Lord Charles Beresford. A naval officer of roguish charm and relentless vitality, he was Bertie's confidant and Daisy's grand passion. By 1886, their affair was aflame, his visits to Easton Lodge no longer secret to watchful eyes. Passion, however, breeds recklessness. Daisy's jealousy drove her into Lady Charles Beresford's bedroom, where she flung truth like a dagger, declaring their affair and threatening elopement. Lady Charles, unmoved by Daisy's theatrics, whisked her husband away from Easton Lodge, ending the liaison. But humiliation was far from the final act. Consumed by wounded pride, Daisy wrote Lord Charles a letter, a blistering missive accusing him of fathering one of her children and demanding he abandon his wife. Utterly shocking, it was said, and Lady Charles seized upon it. The letter landed in the hands of George Lewis, a solicitor who made his living untangling the sordid knots of society's scandals. Desperate to reclaim her damning words, Daisy turned to the Prince of Wales. Bertie intervened first as protector, then as something more. Daisy later recalled, "I saw him looking at me in a way all women understand." He pressed Lady Charles to destroy the letter, but she refused, demanding Daisy's banishment from London's royal season. Bertie escalated. Invitations to the Beresfords ceased. Whispers of disgrace followed them through drawing rooms. Furious, Lady Charles accused the prince of blackmail, but his influence prevailed. The scandal ignited a rift between Bertie and Lord Charles that smoldered until January 1890, when the two men came face to face. Lord Charles, his anger unquenched, called the future king a blackguard. The argument nearly ended in blows, broken only by Lord Charles's departure to command HMS Undaunted. For Daisy, the scandal was both punishment and reward. Bertie's protection ensured her place at his side, her reliance on him deepening, their connection undeniable. The affair had ended in jealousy, humiliation, and near ruin. But it had also shattered something within her. A woman who, once so shy on the dance floor, had now emerged as a figure impossible to ignore. She had crossed the threshold from beauty to infamy, and there was no turning back. 9 years after his celebrated affair with Lillie Langtry ended, the Prince of Wales fell deeply, hopelessly in love once again. This time, it was not merely a passing infatuation. To him, Daisy Brooke, vivacious, beautiful, and sharp-witted, was not just a mistress, but something far more intimate. In his eyes, she was his wife. He He addressed her so, his darling Daisy wife, his own adored little Daisy wife. Unlike the ephemeral attachments of his past, Daisy intrigued the prince beyond surface charm. She was more than a social butterfly drawn to scandal. She was intelligent, worldly, and capable of discussing what she called the affairs of the greater world outside. The prince, though not a man known for astuteness, quickly recognized Daisy's substance. In these early years, he could scarcely bear to be apart from her, filling the distance with letters, often thrice weekly, bursting with affectionate trivialities. "Now, my loved one," he would write from Chatsworth, "I must dress and breakfast. God bless you, my own adored little Daisy wife. Forever yours, your only love." To Daisy, this man, the prince, the future king, was sentimental to the core. He remembered every anniversary, every significant moment, and delighted in bestowing tokens of his affection. A traveling clock with a sentimental little gadget, a plain gold ring inscribed as though it were an unspoken vow, gifts showered upon her at the slightest hint of admiration. "I grew to like him very much," Daisy later reflected. "I think anybody would have been won by him." And Daisy was won, not just by the man, but by the life he offered. As his obsession grew, so too did her place within the glittering world of the Marlborough House set. She described it in later years as though recalling the magic of a pantomime's transformation scene. Society's shimmering gowns and dazzling figures, the thrill of stepping into an enchanted fairyland. She sailed at Cowes, raced at Goodwood and Epsom, and attended every ball, house party, and opera where the prince's shadow loomed large. Soon, the gossip pages of society journals immortalized her as the woman who held the Prince of Wales's heart. At the opera, the world reported breathlessly, Lady Brooke was glimpsed, a brilliant, haughty beauty whose fame had pierced even to the quietest corners of the countryside. Paris, however, was where their romance truly flourished. Traveling under the transparent alias of Baron Renfrew, the prince stayed at the Hotel Bristol while Daisy discreetly lodged nearby. Together, they climbed the Eiffel Tower, admired art, and indulged in the pleasures of Parisian cuisine. Daisy claimed she dared not admire anything in the shop windows for fear gifts would rain upon her. Of course, Paris also meant fashion, and with the prince as her benefactor, Daisy Brooke became the living embodiment of elegance. She visited the leading couturiers, Doucet for day dresses, Worth for gowns of staggering extravagance. At Worth's atelier, the process was almost sacred. "This," Worth would murmur, selecting luxurious fabric as though painting a masterpiece. "This and this." Under his hands, the gowns took shape, each a symbol of Daisy's rise to society's pinnacle. No ball, no soiree, no hunt passed without her dazzling the room. Her gowns, chronicled breathlessly by society columns, were masterpieces in violet velvet, pearls, and diaphanous layers, always with the Prince of Wales at her side. In London, they shared stolen moments at private supper rooms in the Café Royal and Kettner's, places discreet enough to allow intimacy, yet luxurious enough to satisfy royalty. Behind those closed doors, Daisy confessed, the Prince of Wales was a very perfect, gentle lover. The romance, intense as it was, benefited from the quiet evolution of Victorian sensibilities. The advent of rubber condoms, spurred by vulcanization, offered discreet protection for lovers like them. At last, passion no longer came with the threat of scandalous consequence. The manufacturers, ever irreverent, emblazoned Queen Victoria and Mr. Gladstone on their packaging, an irony surely not lost on the prince. But for Daisy, the prince's love was more than jewels and ballrooms. It was a force that propelled her into a world of influence and intrigue, a world where she was both muse and confidant. And in the public eye, no matter the whispers, she stood as a woman of beauty, wit, and undeniable power. Daisy Brooke's country home, Easton Lodge, was the resplendent stage upon which her affair with the Prince of Wales played out. Set in 1,200 acres of sweeping Essex parkland, where ancient oaks stood sentinel over grazing herds of deer, Easton was an embodiment of Victorian grandeur. Though Daisy's ambitions to transform it into a mock Gothic palace never came to fruition, the mansion exuded an eclectic magnificence, a vivid blend of tasteful opulence and ostentatious clutter. Rooms draped in brightly flowered wallpaper showcased old masters beside faded family portraits, priceless objets d'art jostled with trifling knickknacks. In the hall, Surrounded by hunting trophies from Lord Brooke's exploits, loomed the improbable neck and head of a giraffe, stuffed and towering over all. It was here that Daisy presided with the confident charm of a grand dame. The loveliest woman in England, one guest enthused, of high rank, ample riches, and great intelligence, blessed with a charming husband who adored her. Whether Lord Brooke's adoration remained as steadfast as appearances suggested is uncertain. If love meant standing aside to allow one's wife unrestrained happiness, however, then Lord Brooke was indeed an ideal husband. He accepted Daisy's liaison with the Prince of Wales with a stoic grace. The prince, Daisy explained, admired Lord Brooke's repose of temperament and shared with him a camaraderie rooted in sport. Lord Brooke himself spoke of the royal guest in only the most benign terms, describing him as affable, courteous, and responsive, a man who made prince or plowman feel at ease. No trace of jealousy or resentment marred his public composure, nor, for that matter, did his own indiscretions. Daisy's husband was not above flirtation. When a lady guest was caught in his arms mid-rose garden, she fled indoors in indignation, only for her husband to laugh and declare, "Good old Brookie." For Daisy, the prince's visits to Easton were idyllic interludes. Here, stripped of the formal trappings of court life, he indulged in his love of nature, strolling hand in hand with Daisy across the park to the little church on Sunday mornings, or through her celebrated garden of friendship. Unlike some of his former mistresses, Daisy proved an engaging companion beyond the ballrooms and boudoirs. She delighted in political gossip, foreign affairs, and matters of social reform, revealing herself to be a woman of both intellect and substance. At Easton, the royal visits required military-scale preparations. House parties, or what Daisy termed brilliant gatherings, were orchestrated with meticulous care. Guests arrived by special train, their luggage, brass-bound, domed trunks padlocked shut, conveyed in a fleet of carriages. Servants swarmed to meet the influx, bands played, and feasts were prepared with indulgent extravagance: caviar, ptarmigans, ortolans, champagne. One chef's culinary brilliance, Daisy sighed, was rivaled only by his wastefulness. Among those swept into Daisy's glittering orbit was Elinor Glyn, the future romantic novelist, who moved near Easton in 1892. Glyn, a striking redhead with jade-green eyes, described Daisy with a fascination bordering on reverence. "I have never seen anyone so completely fascinating," she declared, as Daisy Brooke. She possessed beauty and wit, but also that supreme personal charm I later called it. Daisy's allure, Glyn reflected, lay in her innocence as much as her mischief. She would arrive at parties, a piping bullfinch perched on her hand, her smile the playful expression of a Persian kitten tangled in silk. At Easton, Daisy was more than a hostess. She was a diplomat in the intricate game of society liaisons. She had a sixth sense for romantic intrigue. Should two guests arrange a clandestine meeting, she would subtly smooth the way. "Stone Hall, my little pleasure house," she might suggest innocently, providing privacy without scandal. And should strangers blunder into the scene, Daisy would graciously detain them with polite conversation until her friends had made their escape. In such moments, Daisy's mastery of discretion elevated her role beyond that of a mistress or hostess. She was a power player in her own right, a woman whose influence rippled through the gilded circles of society. This world of opulent entertainment came at a staggering cost. For the Rothschilds or Devonshires, the expense was manageable. For others, it was ruinous. Men and women scrimped and sank into debt for the privilege of entertaining royalty. Christopher Sykes, the prince's sycophantic companion, knew this all too well. Sykes had bankrupted himself, hosting parties at Brantingham Thorpe, reduced to financial ruin by his devotion to the prince's pleasure. And yet, in this dazzling world of privilege, whispered secrets, and borrowed fortunes, time exacted its revenge. By 1890, the prince's visit to Doncaster for the St. Leger races, a yearly tradition, saw him staying not with Sykes, but with Arthur Wilson, a wealthy shipowner at Tranby Croft. It was there that scandal erupted, the fallout from a gambling incident shaking the prince's life and leaving shadows that no amount of champagne or silk-draped rooms could dispel. The Tranby Croft scandal, one of the most infamous episodes of the Victorian Age, cast a long and lasting shadow over Daisy Brooke, marking her with the cruel epithet, the Babbling Brook. It all began with the Wilson family, wealthy ship owners who were ecstatic to host the Prince of Wales at their home near Doncaster for the St. Leger races. Naturally, Daisy and Lord Brooke were invited, but the death of Daisy's stepfather, Lord Rosslyn, prevented their attendance. In their absence, the prince arrived with his entourage, which included Sir William Gordon Cumming, a dashing Scots Guards officer, and the smartest man about town, as Daisy once described him. Gordon Cumming, however, would prove to be not quite smart enough. Over 2 nights of baccarat, whispers erupted that he had been caught cheating. Confronted by the prince and the other guests, Sir William signed a private document promising never to play cards again, a pledge extracted under the condition that the affair remains strictly secret. It was a fragile truce, and secrets, as Daisy well knew, rarely stayed hidden long. Days later, on her journey north to Scotland for her stepfather's funeral, Daisy and the prince crossed paths at York Station. Perhaps eager to unburden himself, Bertie confided the entire sordid affair to Daisy. The details, it seems, did not stop there. Whether Daisy shared the tale with her relations at the funeral, as gossip claimed, or whether it escaped through other lips, the damage was done. The scandal broke, and at the center of the rumor mill stood Daisy Brooke, forever branded as the indiscreet culprit. The babbling Brooke, society sneered. The title, with its cruel cleverness, clung to her for the rest of her days, an injustice Daisy always vehemently denied. Her version of events, both during and after the trial, painted her as a bystander caught in the storm, an unwilling scapegoat for a scandal that seemed destined to explode. Once exposed, Sir William Gordon Cumming was forced to sue for libel to salvage his name, dragging the entire sordid affair into court. The Prince of Wales, much to Queen Victoria's horror, found himself embroiled in the proceedings, sitting in the witness box under the gaze of a disapproving nation. But though Gordon Cumming lost his case, public opinion turned against the prince, and by extension, against Daisy herself. The newspapers seized the moment, steeping themselves in moral outrage. The Times condemned the prince's involvement, and the Review of Reviews bristled with scorn, denouncing his circle as a collection of gamblers, wastrels, and worse. The whispers around Daisy were no kinder. Women in society, who had once smiled knowingly at her wit and elegance, now watched her with suspicion. Years later, Daisy reflected on the ordeal with surprising generosity toward Sir William. "I considered him more sinned against than sinning," she claimed. "His punishment had been merciless. Dismissed from the army, expelled from his clubs, and ostracized from society, he spent the rest of his life in bitter seclusion." Daisy admitted to sad thoughts of him, confessing that despite it all, she had kept a warm corner in my heart for him. For Daisy, the scandal did more than bruise her reputation. It solidified her role in the public imagination as a woman at the center of intrigue, charm, and controversy. She was no stranger to society's double standards, where men's indiscretions were forgiven and forgotten, while women's whispers became their defining sins. And yet, Daisy remained undaunted. Her wit was intact, her allure undiminished. If society labeled her a gossip, then so be it. She would play her part with grace. In the years that followed, as Bertie withdrew to Sandringham to lick his wounds, Daisy's presence remained a testament to her resilience. For while the Tranby Croft trial had rattled a future king, it would not shake Daisy Brooke from the place she had carved for herself in the glittering world she ruled so effortlessly. No sooner had the storm of the Tranby Croft scandal quieted than another tempest erupted around Daisy Brooke. This time, her rival, Lady Charles Beresford, reignited a feud that threatened to shatter Daisy's carefully constructed world. Lady Charles, embittered by her exclusion from the Prince of Wales's inner circle, could no longer tolerate Daisy's ascendance. The final straw came in the summer of 1891, when the prince publicly received Daisy at Marlborough House, a mark of favor Lady Charles found unbearable. Furious, she demanded that her husband, Lord Charles Beresford, take action. Lord Charles, fiery and impetuous, responded with a letter so dangerous it shook the highest ranks of society. In it, he accused the Prince of Wales of behaving like a blackguard and a coward, and threatened to expose the affair to the public. The letter reached not the prince, but the Prime Minister, along with a chilling warning. Lady Charles's sister had already written a pamphlet, thinly veiled as Lady River, detailing Daisy's affair with the prince. Rumors spread that the pamphlet could be used as a political weapon in the next election. The stakes were too high to ignore. Behind the scenes, desperate negotiations ensued to contain the scandal. The Prime Minister appealed to Lord Charles's sense of honor, reminding him of the laws of our class. A gentleman must never disgrace his former mistress. But the damage was already spreading. Copies of Lady River circulated like wildfire through London's drawing rooms. Society hostesses held readings, gleefully dissecting Daisy's reputation. The Princess of Wales, Alexandra, usually tolerant of Bertie's indiscretions, refused to return from Denmark for his 50th birthday, her absence a public rebuke. Meanwhile, whispers of divorce swirled around Lord Brooke, who had long tolerated Daisy's indiscretions, but now appeared to have reached his limit. Yet divorce was unthinkable. To drag their private lives into the public courts, naming the Prince of Wales among others, would have been ruinous for everyone involved. Lord Brooke chose silence, an act of quiet gallantry that spared Daisy and their family further shame. For Daisy, the scandal was a personal humiliation, but it did not diminish her hold on the Prince of Wales. If anything, his devotion only deepened. 5 years later, at Ascot, the prince encountered Lord Charles Beresford for the first time in years. That same day, Bertie wrote to Daisy in a letter overflowing with loyalty and affection. "My own lovely little Daisy, I lose no time in writing to tell you of an episode which occurred today after you left. I saw Lord Charles at the racetrack. He came up with his hat off and would not put it on till I told him, and shook hands. We talked a little about racing, then I turned and we parted. What struck me more than anything was his humble attitude and manner. My loyalty to you is, I hope, a thing that you will never think of doubting." Despite the pamphlets, the whispers, and the near ruin of reputations, Daisy Brooke remained the woman who held the prince's heart. To society, she might have been the babbling brook, a figure of scandal and intrigue. But to the prince, she was still his darling Daisy wife. Though one wonders what the prince would have thought if he knew that after his death, those very same letters which he wrote her would be used by Daisy to blackmail the monarchy. In December 1893, Daisy Brooke's life changed once again. With her husband inheriting the title of Earl of Warwick, she became the Countess of Warwick. The stage for this next act was Warwick Castle, an ancient fortress of stone and shadow, perched above the River Avon. Under Daisy's reign, the castle, long dormant and gray, exploded with life. Her most dazzling performance came in February 1895, when Daisy transformed Warwick into a Versailles fantasy. Her ball, dedicated to Louis XVI, was unlike anything the castle had seen in centuries. Guests arrived in powdered wigs and silken gowns, their hair towering in ornate cascades, while candlelight flickered off diamonds and gilded brocade. Daisy herself, dressed as Marie Antoinette in turquoise velvet and a plume of ostrich feathers, presided like a queen of her own creation. But no sooner had the last guest departed than reality struck with a cruel hand. A left-wing newspaper, the Clarion, attacked her extravagance, accusing her of wasting thousands on a silly masquerade while so many lived in poverty. Furious and indignant, Daisy saw the ball as a source of employment, a boon for dressmakers, gardeners, and maids. But her anger wouldn't let her sit idle. Without hesitation, she caught the next train to London, arriving unannounced at the Clarion's office. Robert Blatchford, the paper's editor, looked up to see the Countess of Warwick, draped in elegance, standing in his doorway. "How could you write such lies?" Daisy demanded, the newspaper clenched in her hand. That ball gave work to half the county. Blatchford, unmoved by her indignation, invited her to sit. And then, calmly, he began to speak, not with anger, but with conviction. What good, he asked, were a few days of labor that led nowhere? What of the workers who toiled endlessly for the whims of the wealthy, only to remain trapped in poverty? For hours, Daisy listened as Blatchford laid bare the injustice of the world, how the labor that truly mattered was often dismissed, ignored. On the train home to Warwickshire, his words echoed in her mind, piercing her pride. She later wrote, "I knew that my outlook on life could never be the same as before that day. It was as if I had found a real world." Daisy's awakening was not immediate. The lavish parties continued, as did her affair with the Prince of Wales. But a seed had been planted, a small, unshakable conviction that her privilege could be put to better use. "I wondered," she mused later, "might I not take my royal lover by the hand and lead him along that same enlightened path?" This awakening was gradual but profound. Daisy began to see her privilege not merely as a birthright, but as a responsibility. She ran for election as a trustee of the local workhouse, delivering a speech that called for shared responsibility between men and women, an unusually progressive stance for her time. Her victory marked her first step into public life, blending her aristocratic status with her growing desire for reform. She began to write articles favoring women's right to vote and for fairer treatment of the working classes. Her evolving purpose, however, did not diminish her flair for theatrics. In 1896, the fallout from the Jameson Raid, a botched British invasion of the Boer-controlled Transvaal, offered Daisy a new outlet for her dramatic instincts. To many, the raid was reckless imperialism, but Daisy, drawn to romantic notions of empire, saw it as a valiant stand. Outraged by Germany's support for the Boers, she penned a fiery letter to the Times, defending the raiders and rebuking the press for its disloyalty. Writing on behalf of all Englishwomen, she even delivered a veiled swipe at Kaiser Wilhelm II. The letter caused a sensation, but rumors soon spread that Daisy had written directly to the Kaiser. Her uncle, Count Münster, the German ambassador, expressed his disapproval. "I hear Daisy has written a most impertinent letter to the Emperor. She ought to have dressed in black and held her tongue." Daisy might have laughed off the absurdity, but the Prince of Wales was livid. At Bertie's insistence, Daisy sent a formal denial, drafted under his watchful eye. Her response was cutting. "I cannot get over my astonishment at so unwarrantable a statement. This is not the first time you have said unkind things about me to Mama. I feel your unkindness very deeply." Though Count Münster apologized, he couldn't resist a final barb. Ladies ought not to be jingos. But Daisy remained unapologetic. Her patriotism, especially where Cecil Rhodes was concerned, burned brightly. Through her mentor, W.T. Steed, Daisy had come to admire Rhodes as a visionary. Steed, a radical journalist known for his groundbreaking exposés and reformist zeal, had become one of Daisy's closest confidants. He believed in the moral mission of empire, a conviction that resonated with Daisy. Together, they had successfully got the government to raise the age of consent from 13 to 16. Through his eyes, Rhodes was not a disgraced opportunist, but a man whose ambition could elevate the British Empire. Even Bertie, undeterred by Rhodes's public controversies, called him a remarkable man and welcomed him into royal circles. Rhodes, for his part, was an unconventional figure. Disheveled and brusque, he lacked the polish of Daisy's aristocratic world, yet his ideas captivated her. Cecil Rhodes was that strange, unmistakable thing, a man of genius, she later wrote. Despite his reputation as a misogynist, Daisy believed she had earned his genuine affection. By late 1896, Daisy saw herself as a bridge between Steed's radical ideals and Bertie's royal influence. She hosted a luncheon at her South Audley Street home, bringing the two men together in hopes of aligning their power for progressive causes. Steed, typically unshakable, found himself nervous in Bertie's presence, fretting over topics of conversation. But when the prince arrived, his genial charm put Steed at ease. The discussion meandered from politics to pensions, and while Daisy imagined herself forging a lasting connection between these two contrasting figures, the reality was less impactful. Steed's fiery zeal and Bertie's casual interest were worlds apart. As Daisy's relationships with both men evolved, so too did her focus. By 1897, the golden era of Daisy's relationship with Bertie was fading. Their once vibrant affair had turned platonic, as was inevitable with the prince's restless nature. For Daisy, who had never been deeply in love with him, the shift felt more like a release than a heartbreak. "I found him boresome," she later admitted to a friend, recalling evenings when he sat goggling at me while holding her hand. Bertie's attentions drifted elsewhere, to Alice Keppel, who would soon replace Daisy as his favored mistress. Meanwhile, Daisy's own focus shifted decisively, inspired by her growing commitment to social reform and the influence she threw herself into progressive causes. Bertie, ever obliging, even accompanied her to meet laborers, though the visit ended awkwardly when one berated him for the inequities of the class system. It was Daisy's personal life, however, that marked the final chapter of her connection with Bertie. In March 1898, at the age of 35, she gave birth to her fourth child, a son, Maynard, a child who brought her profound joy and affection, a stark contrast to her more distant relationships with her older children. Tragically, her third child, believed to have been fathered by Lord Charles, had died at just 18 months old. Speculation swirled about Maynard's paternity as well. Many biographers claimed the boy was Bertie's, and despite the end of their affair, the prince continued to support Daisy for the rest of his life. Others suggested the child's father was Joseph Laycock. Whatever the truth, the birth symbolized both a closing and an opening chapter in Daisy's life. Aware of the shifting tides of royal favor and the scrutiny of Queen Victoria, Daisy staged her exit with characteristic finesse. She wrote 2 carefully crafted letters, one to Bertie and one to Alexandra. In her letter to the prince, she emphasized the platonic nature of their relationship and expressed her hope to remain his loyal friend. To Alexandra, she appealed as a noble and gracious woman, seeking forgiveness and urging her to rise above the gossip that surrounded them. Her strategy was masterful. Bertie, moved by Daisy's beautiful letter, shared it with Alexandra, who responded with measured grace. Outwardly forgiving, Alexandra maintained her frosty distance. Her son, the Duke of York, made the family's position clear in a terse letter to his wife. In case you should hear from Lady Warwick asking you to become president of a charity of hers, refuse it. Mother dear has done so and wishes you to do the same. Daisy cherished Alexandra's final gesture, a small crucifix wrapped in paper, inscribed with the words, "From one who has suffered much and forgives all." Whether a sincere offering or a quiet rebuke, it marked the symbolic conclusion of Daisy's royal chapter. For Daisy Warwick, the affair with Bertie was never truly about love. It was about power, influence, and a place at the epicenter of Edwardian society. As the prince turned his attentions elsewhere, Daisy emerged unscathed and undiminished. Her ambitions, once tied to royal favor, had evolved. Now, with her focus on reform, sharpening, and her passions redirected, she stepped confidently into a new role. Not as a royal mistress, but as a woman determined to leave a very different kind of legacy. By 1898, Daisy Warwick's relentless quest for love reached a fever pitch. At 36, she was swept into an intoxicating affair with the dashing Captain Joseph Laycock. 5 years her junior, Laycock was a man of rugged charm and magnetic energy, exuding the kind of raw allure that made women lose their footing. Powerfully built and wealthy, he embodied the aristocratic traditions Daisy so often decried in public, yet she adored him with a fervor that bordered on obsession. She later admitted she worshipped him wildly. This was no repeat of her dalliance with the Prince of Wales. With Bertie, Daisy had held the reins, basking in his devotion. With Laycock, the roles reversed. Daisy was no longer the conqueror but the conquered, her love unreciprocated in equal measure. Laycock, captivated at first, gifted her the customary wedding ring of a clandestine affair, a gesture she must have poignantly accepted after removing Bertie's ring. For a time, Laycock appeared to share her passion, even supporting Daisy's humanitarian endeavors with financial contributions at a moment when she desperately needed them. Her opulent lifestyle had begun to devour her wealth. The fortune that once amounted to £30,000 a year had dwindled to a paltry £6,000, a reality Daisy refused to confront. She continued to dazzle society in exquisite gowns, spending extravagantly on her estates, while insisting she cared little for money. But their romance burned fast and bright, extinguished by Laycock's departure to fight in the Boer War. Daisy, left behind, was gripped by jealousy and paranoia, her imagination haunted by visions of Laycock's infidelities. Her worst fears materialized upon his return. An innocuous hunting accident introduced him to the radiant Kitty Downshire, 11 years Daisy's junior, married and captivating. Their connection was instant, and Daisy, eclipsed, spiraled into despair. Her letters to Laycock became frantic, desperate missives, drenched in longing. "Joe, my Joe," she scrawled in one trembling note, "if you could see how my hand shakes when I write your name." But her appeals fell on indifferent ears. The scandal erupted when news broke that Kitty's husband intended to divorce her, naming Laycock as co-respondent. Daisy, convinced her lover would marry Kitty, wielded every weapon in her arsenal to prevent the union. She even sought the intervention of her former paramour, King Edward. "The king was more than nice to me," Daisy confided to Laycock in 1902, grasping at hope. "He agrees about it all and says, as we do, you must go away for a bit, then things will be all right." But even royal council couldn't dissuade Laycock. In November of that year, he married Kitty Downshire. Daisy, heartbroken and humiliated, penned him a scathing rebuke, lamenting that while friends from across the globe had remembered her birthday, even the king gifting her a diamond and turquoise bracelet, she had received nothing from Joe, the man she had given everything. The betrayal didn't end their entanglement. A few years later, Daisy bore Laycock's child, further complicating her already tumultuous life. By this point, her personal finances were crumbling under the weight of her extravagance. Her estate at Easton boasted a sprawling menagerie, complete with rare birds, ponies, and even a white peacock that roamed its opulent grounds. Her gardens, designed by a renowned architect, stretched over 10 meticulously landscaped acres, including a canal lined with lilies. It was a display of excess at odds with the socialist ideals she professed. But Daisy's contradictions didn't end there. She turned her attention to grander pursuits. Warwick Castle became her stage for fostering an Anglo-American alliance. Dignitaries and American tourists alike were greeted with the stars and stripes flying from the castle's ramparts as Daisy envisioned uniting the English-speaking world. Her audacity knew no bounds. She even encouraged Steed to find a wealthy American philanthropist to bankroll her utopian vision. King Edward, however, refused to support her efforts, tactfully pointing out that Britain's future alliances lay in Europe, not across the Atlantic. Even Daisy's elaborate tea parties, orchestrated to charm the American wives of British aristocrats, couldn't sway him. Yet Bertie remained steadfast in his personal support. When Daisy's eldest son, Guy, insisted on fighting in the Boer War at just 17, Bertie offered guidance to keep him out of harm's way. He even counseled Daisy on persuading her husband, the Earl of Warwick, to forgo military service. Through it all, Daisy and Bertie's friendship endured, a bond steeped in mutual affection. In 1899, on the 10th anniversary of their affair, Bertie wrote her a heartfelt letter affirming the reality and sincerity of their connection. His letters, Daisy reflected, were unselfish, always full of praise for others and wise counsel, but Daisy's penchant for drama and financial recklessness would eventually poison even this relationship. Decades later, as her fortunes dwindled further, she threatened to use Bertie's affectionate letters to blackmail his son, King George V. The death of Queen Victoria in 1901 and the coronation of Edward VII, her former lover, seemed to offer Daisy a flicker of renewed promise. No longer a mere relic of Bertie's past, she imagined herself ascending to a new role, trusted confidant, even a discreet advisor to the newly crowned king. Yet these aspirations were swiftly and unceremoniously shattered. Shortly after Edward's ascension, Viscount Esher, one of the king's most trusted advisors, arrived at Daisy's door bearing a message cloaked in elegant brutality. Queen Alexandra, now wielding her position with quiet but implacable resolve, demanded Daisy's withdrawal from royal affairs. "It is not personal," Esher assured her. But Daisy, ever adept at reading between the lines, knew better. Alexandra, whose glacial composure had endured a lifetime of her husband's indiscretions, would not tolerate a countess with radical views and a scandal-strewn past, tarnishing the carefully crafted image of the new monarchy. Soon after, Alexandra's final blow arrived in the form of a letter. Restrained and distant, its tone as cold as the queen herself, it formally severed Daisy from the royal circle. Edward VII, though privately kind and exchanging occasional letters and tokens of affection, would never again openly align himself with Daisy. "The court," Daisy remarked with bitter elegance, "has no memory for those it discards." Yet, just as Daisy resolved to reinvent herself as a champion for the voiceless, life dealt her another unexpected hand. In 1904, at the age of 42, she discovered she was pregnant once more. "Oh, mercy!" she reportedly exclaimed upon realizing her condition, and Mercy became the name of her youngest daughter. The arrival of Mercy, fathered by Laycock, came at a time when Daisy's life was already at a crossroads. Torn between her aristocratic roots and her burgeoning passion for social reform, she found little room for traditional motherhood. While other mothers balanced their households, Daisy balanced campaign speeches and cooperative meetings, leaving her youngest child in the care of nannies. The irony was not lost on her. "I fight for mothers with 12 children and no bread," she later reflected. "Yet I have but one and no time." Despite this conflict, Daisy poured her heart into her activism, transforming Easton Lodge into a crucible of radical thought. Gone were the idle gossip and glittering frivolities of her youth. In their place came impassioned debates and revolutionary ideals, as her dining tables welcomed intellectual luminaries like H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, and Ramsay MacDonald. "I learned to listen," Daisy reflected in later years. "For the first time, I truly began to see." Yet for all her proletarian sympathies, Daisy remained unmistakably grand. Draped in furs, she addressed cooperative society meetings. In pearls, entertained trade unionists in her Italianate London home, and traveled to workers' rallies in her 40-horsepower Wolseley, her voice ringing out over crowded halls, urging reforms like free meals for schoolchildren. At Naughton Towers, the luxurious home of her son-in-law, Viscount Helmsley, she campaigned for Labour candidates in the heart of conservative strongholds. "She speaks of equality but lives like a queen," her son Guy once remarked, bewildered by the dualities of her life. Daisy did not deny the contradictions. "I do not care for pearls," she quipped to an aristocratic critic, "but if they draw the eye long enough for someone to hear the truth, then I shall wear them." Her passion for reform was neither performative nor fleeting. By 1905, Daisy had done the unthinkable for a woman of her rank. She joined the Social Democratic Federation, Britain's most radical socialist organization. The press, salivating at the incongruity of a pearl-clad countess marching alongside factory workers, dubbed her the Red Countess. Critics accused her of betraying her class, while reformers hailed her as a powerful, if improbable, ally. Her speeches were as daring as they were eloquent, laced with humor and conviction. To a crowd of factory workers, she confessed, "You may think it strange to see a countess among you, but let me tell you, there's no manual more exhausting than writing checks for the undeserving rich." At another rally, she declared, "The gilded rooms of my birth taught me one thing, that wealth without justice is a prison, and I refuse to remain its prisoner." Yet this new chapter came with immense personal cost. Her aristocratic friends, scandalized by her socialism, abandoned her. Her sister Millicent, the mother of Rosemary, stopped speaking with her, believing her performances false, and her eldest son Guy, who had never been close to his mother, stopped speaking with her and turned to drink. Her finances, already precarious from years of extravagant entertaining, crumbled under the weight of her new commitments. By 1907, Daisy was drowning in debt, forced to sell heirlooms and properties to sustain her causes. But she never wavered. "If the cost of purpose is poverty," she wrote, "then I shall pay it gladly." Through it all, Daisy stood at the crossroads of two worlds, the crumbling aristocracy of her birth and the rising tide of socialism she had embraced. At a rally in Manchester in 1908, her voice rose with undiminished fervor. "The world I was born into is dying, and I do not mourn its loss. From its ashes, let a better world rise, a world for the worker, the mother, the child, and we must build it together." By 1914, Daisy's debts were staggering. Warwick Castle and Easton Lodge were mortgaged beyond redemption, her valuables sold or seized, and her grand schemes to revive her fortunes. Writing newspaper columns, lecturing in America, or penning scripts for the cinema had all come to nothing. With creditors circling and no relief in sight, Daisy turned her gaze to the one asset she had left, the love letters of her former royal lover, Edward VII. These were no ordinary letters. Addressed to his darling Daisy wife, they were rich with endearments, but also indiscreet political musings, a dangerous combination from a man who had reigned as monarch. While most of Edward's private correspondence had been destroyed upon his death, Daisy had held on to her letters, treasures of sentiment that now promised salvation. But Daisy had no intention of exposing the king's secrets to the world. Instead, she sought payment not for publication, but for her silence. And the price of that silence? £100,000, an astronomical sum, even by Edwardian standards. To carry out her scheme, Daisy enlisted intermediaries, including the notorious Frank Heiress, a literary rogue with a nose for scandal, and Arthur Dew Cross, a respectable businessman and her creditor. Daisy's plan was to let the palace know, through carefully placed hints, that the letters might find their way into Heiress's hands, or worse, to America, unless her financial woes were resolved. The message was received loud and clear. Soon, representatives of King George V, Edward's son, began to maneuver behind the scenes to suppress the potential scandal. But the palace was far craftier than Daisy anticipated. Instead of paying her off, they deployed every tool of discretion and influence to neutralize the threat. Detectives were sent to track the letters, legal injunctions were issued in secrecy, and Daisy found herself outmaneuvered at every turn. By the summer of 1914, her plot collapsed. The letters, once her greatest weapon, were surrendered under the watchful eyes of royal solicitors and destroyed, their contents lost forever. Daisy, however, was never one to concede defeat entirely. Though she lost the battle over the letters, she emerged with a consolation prize. Arthur Dew Cross, perhaps eager to end the ordeal or to shield his own reputation, forgave her significant debts and took on her mounting bills, totaling over £60,000. "I am handing back with splendid generosity," Daisy later declared, cloaking her failed gambit in an air of moral victory. "The letters King Edward wrote me of his great love." Despite her losses, Daisy carried on, as irrepressible as ever. Years later, when she published her memoirs, she made no mention of the letters or the scandal they nearly unleashed. Instead, she portrayed herself as a loyal confidant, too noble to betray the intimacies of the powerful. "How could I betray the great ones who trusted me?" she asked rhetorically. When the First World War erupted in 1914, Daisy found herself standing at odds with much of her social class. While the British aristocracy rallied behind the war effort with patriotic fervor, Daisy's voice rang out as a discordant note. She viewed the conflict not as a noble crusade, but as a calamity born of imperial greed and the ambitions of the elite. To Daisy, the trenches of Europe were not theaters of valor, but slaughterhouses for the working class, a brutal testament to the inequities she had spent years fighting to expose. Daisy's opposition to the war was unflinching. She joined pacifist organizations, attended anti-war meetings, and lent her name to causes supporting conscientious objectors. Her speeches during this time were fiery and unapologetic, cutting to the heart of the war's class dynamics. At one rally, she proclaimed, "The blood of the poor is the price of the rich man's power. How much longer will you pay it?" These sentiments alienated many, even within her own family, some of whom were serving at the front, and it is possible that this action changed the course of the monarchy forever, as during these years the young Prince Edward was courting Daisy's niece Lady Rosemary and sought to marry her. But his mother, Queen Mary, refused the union over what she called Rosemary's tainted blood. For more information on Lady Rosemary and her relationship with the prince, please check out our video on the channel. To her aristocratic peers, Daisy's pacifism was tantamount to treason, a betrayal of her class and country. The press, eager for scandal, painted her as a hypocrite, a countess draped in pearls, daring to lecture on the exploitation of the working class. Yet Daisy stood firm, her belief in the futility of the war unshaken. In a letter from 1916, she wrote, "What victory can there be when mothers bury their sons for the sake of borders drawn by kings?" Despite her pacifist stance, Daisy was not idle during the war. True to her ideals, she found ways to contribute that aligned with her beliefs. She transformed Easton Lodge into a convalescent hospital for wounded soldiers, providing a serene environment for healing. Soldiers recovering at her estate often remarked on her kindness, though some found her political views perplexing. Daisy used these interactions as opportunities to discuss the inequalities that had sent so many young men to their deaths. She also lobbied for better treatment of returning soldiers, particularly working-class veterans, whom she feared would face neglect once the war ended. Her vision extended beyond the battlefield. She argued that Britain's post-war recovery must address the systemic inequalities that had fueled the conflict, warning, "If we rebuild the same house of greed and privilege, we will only prepare for the next war." By the war's end in 1918, Daisy's efforts were both lauded and derided. To some, she was a courageous voice for peace and reform, a woman unafraid to challenge the status quo. To others, she was a deluded idealist, clinging to the remnants of her aristocratic life while championing causes she could never truly embody. Even within socialist circles, her wealth and title made her an object of suspicion. One critic famously quipped, "She preaches equality from a velvet chaise, sipping tea from porcelain finer than most will ever see." But Daisy was undeterred. She continued writing articles, delivering speeches, and advocating for land reform and social justice. She envisioned a Britain where the sacrifices of war would lead to a more equitable society, a dream she tirelessly pursued despite mounting criticism. The promises of a fairer society, so often invoked during wartime, quickly evaporated in the post-war years. Returning soldiers faced unemployment and poverty, and the aristocracy largely resumed its gilded existence. For Daisy, this disillusionment only reignited her fervor for reform. She declared in a speech in 1919, "The trenches may be empty, but the battle for justice has only begun." This time, the enemy is not across the channel, but in the halls of power. Her financial struggles, exacerbated by her philanthropic commitments during the war, became fodder for tabloids eager to tarnish her reputation. Yet Daisy refused to retreat. In her later writings, she reflected on the war as a personal crucible, a time that tested her beliefs and her resilience. "I was born to privilege, but it is the suffering of others that has taught me to live. If that lesson makes me an outcast, then so be it." No one could accuse Daisy of fading quietly into her twilight years. As the world changed around her, she refused to be swept away by its tide. In her 60s and 70s, she remained as bold, opinionated, and scandalous as ever, clinging not to the memories of her past, but to the fierce ideals that had defined her later life. "The way not to admit age, not to brand oneself as a back number," she declared, "is to keep heart and faith and enthusiasms, but age has a way of chipping away at even the most unyielding spirits." Beneath her defiant exterior, the weight of loss and a fading world began to press harder on Daisy's indomitable will. Her husband, the Earl of Warwick, passed away in 1924. Though they had weathered years of estrangement and financial strain, his death left her alone to face a crumbling estate and mounting debts. Then came the more devastating blow. Her eldest son, Guy, died just 2 years later, estranged from his mother, drowning in depression and drink. The distance between them, a chasm widened by Daisy's controversial ideals and their clashing personalities, remained tragically unresolved. Despite her grief, Daisy pressed on, channeling her sorrow into purpose. She transformed Easton Lodge into a hub for the Labour Party, offering the house and grounds to the cause she held dear. Yet this grand gesture proved as ill-fated as many of her other enterprises. Labour's more austere members bristled at the mansion's degenerate luxury, as Beatrice Webb put it, with its over-furnished rooms and sprawling gardens filled with Daisy's bizarre menagerie of peacocks, ponies, and monkeys. Daisy herself, resplendent in corsets, picture hats, and opulent gowns, cut an incongruous figure among cardigan-clad socialists. To them, she was a relic of a world they sought to dismantle. But Daisy, undeterred, swept through her friendship garden, recounting scandalous tales of her love affair with Edward VII, pointing out heart-shaped plaques inscribed with the dates he had planted flowers for her. Even the great four-poster bed they had once shared was on full display, much to the mortification of her more prudish guests. In those years, Daisy became a caricature of herself in the eyes of many. Too grand, too eccentric, too much a vestige of a dying age. A young socialist recalled her sweeping into a room with her string of ill-tempered Pekingese dogs, her electric light smile flashing as she launched into impassioned speeches. Her gusts of temper were infamous, her charisma undeniable. And yet, beneath the larger-than-life figure, cracks were forming. A fire in 1918 had destroyed many of her treasured papers, including those she had hoped to use for her memoirs. She suspected foul play, whispering darkly that the palace had a hand in the destruction, just as they had fought to suppress Edward VII's love letters years earlier. Still, Daisy persisted. She published 2 volumes of memoirs, Life's Ebb and Flow in 1929 and Afterthoughts in 1931. Though selective and sanitized, they were her attempt to immortalize a life that refused to conform. About Edward VII, she was cagey, weaving tales of their friendship but leaving just enough unsaid to stir imaginations. Her socialism, however, she wrote about with fiery conviction, marveling at how far the world had come and lamenting how far it still had to go. By the 1930s, the world Daisy had known was almost entirely gone. Her peers in the aristocracy mourned the loss of their gilded privileges, but Daisy welcomed the egalitarian spirit of the new age, even as she lived its contradictions. Too fat to rise from her chair, she presided over Easton Lodge swathed in feather bows, eating hearty breakfasts of sausages and fish cakes. Her beloved menagerie of animals, dogs, cats, peacocks, pigeons, and monkeys, wandered her estate, a chaotic echo of her former grandeur. Eleanor Glynn, once her confidant in society's glittering heyday, wept at the sight of her. But Daisy, with characteristic defiance, dismissed the pity. "I am a very happy woman," she said simply. When Daisy died on July 26, 1938, the world barely noticed. She, who at the age of 3 had been an heiress worth £30,000 a year, left behind just £37,000 in property. And to her faithful housekeeper, the burden of 500 birds and 13 dogs. "I fear," her housekeeper sighed, "the dear Countess did not know it cost £8 a week to keep them." But Daisy's true legacy was not in her dwindled fortune or her eccentricities. It was in her unrelenting belief that the world could be better, more just, more kind, more equal. She had fought for causes that alienated her from her class and scandalized her society. She had endured ridicule, financial ruin, and personal tragedy, yet she never lost her faith in progress. Even in her final memoir, she marveled at the changes she had lived to see, writing, "The present generation will see, as I see, that conditions are far better for the great majority of people than ever they were before. We have made astounding progress." In the end, Daisy Warwick was not a relic of a gilded past, but a rebel who dared to dream of a fairer future. She lived not for the vanishing world of her birth, but for the ideals that outlived her. As the grandeur around her crumbled and the light of her age dimmed, Daisy's spirit burned on, a fierce, untamed flame against the shadows of time, illuminating the path for those brave enough to follow. I thank you for watching this week's video on Lillie and Daisy, and for continuing to support this channel and give women back their voices. And a special thank you to all the mythic men and women who make this channel possible. Bavia Athena, Joy McGuire, Anna Livy, Laura Lamond, Black Cat Tarot, Chrissy Bethune, Karen Craig, Lynn Sharp, Virgie Nelson, Michelle Inman, Black Knight 5897, Wendy Fairfull, Trudy DeSwart, Susie Work, Ram Pitchick, Fiona McDougall, Elizabeth Moore Ross, The Moon is Blue Tonight, Julia Sierra Sanchez, MPB Angola, Deborah Eaton Kent, Rebecca Christians, Albert Norman LeBeouf, Julie Woith, Susan Gillen, Hello Kitty, JK, Mary Ellen Bashaw, CBL Unlimited, Jacqueline Spalding, Ann Casillas, Oreen Fay, Joanne Fuller, Catherine Beecher, Kelly Peck, Mercedes Boyk, Mark Fowler, Maya, Luana Lincoln, Susan McBride, Sue Henderson, Bethany Lee, The Mouse's Ear, Michelle Cohen, Lindsay Stroker, Wanda Von Kleist, Karen Ursel, Margaret Vona, Susan Cox, Mary Brisbane, Laura Cochran, Lady Tiffany B. Robertson, Lee Scruggs Parker, Jan Lundberg, Margarita Coyne, Eileen Morris Duke, Jennifer T., Marie-Therese Baker, Annette Stevens, Paul Fleischer, Snowball 3 French Hens, Andrea Blackburn, TJ Sia, Jean Nature Girl, Naps for All, Vicky Russell, Charles Rosenbaum, Maria Swisher, Barbara Williamson, Virginia Martinez, Moira Ward, Cheryl Ann Rose, Libby Lee, Nancy Jessup, C.R.K. Very, Trudy, Jojer, Carol Leganey, Kalina Langa, Brooke Van Gerbig, Maureen Dixon, Grumpy Bunny, Gloria Huffnagel, Susanna Schroll, Sebna Leon, Toby Wilkinson, Margot Port, Diane Hillenbrand, Bonnie Kirkhock, Becky, Blanche Dillon, Carol A. Grosvenor, Petra Bauman, Marie Philippe, Susan Stedman, Cynthia Languth, Christine H., Sweet Aria Decor, Vicky Barocco, Jody Orr, Chacha Dodds, Courtney King, Sharon Hillman, Dorothy Waleski, Patricia Fulton, Laura Piper, Helen Wilson, Leonie Frieda, Alex Mell, Carolyn Mulder, Kathleen Kyler, Vicky Hewlett, Greg Sepaniak, Harlow Ryu, Sue Putkonen, KME, Sarah Diogardi, Terry Skoltis, Dizzy Gal, Mariana Baldo, Lars Winberg, Karen Williams, Francesca Spano, E.E. Harrison, Sandra Irish, Miguel Fernandez, Patricia Colwell, Lady Kim, Bruce Spencer, Judy Van Cleef, Marianne McNeil, Susan Olson, Ronnie McKinley, Candy Cruzen, Bruce LeClaire, Roxy Schuster, Michelle Caldwell, Carrie Gallegos, Michelle Cohen, Ziggity Wigger, Coralie Reed, and Abby Henriksen. Thank you all. And to everyone, the silent men and women out there watching until the last note plays, thank you too. Until next week, stay curious, stay strong, and as always, thank you for watching Mythic Women.